Olenna. She lied to her face. She actually lied to her, and not just to her, but to her mother and best friend too, though perhaps her new husband was her best friend now, she thought as she chuckled. For moons, she had kept it up to, she knew she'd eventually confided in Sansa, but for moons, her granddaughter had actually kept up the mummery. A few moons earlier, she had been so worried that she practically slept in her granddaughter's room with her. She had her meals there, washed the girl herself. Olenna fed her by her own hand, only leaving her side when it was absolutely essential. Even going to the privy in Marjorie's room rather than her own, and having clothing brought to her instead of going to her room to dress. Allery too had stayed as much as she could, both of them waiting and hoping the fever would break and Marjorie would awake. Lummis was no help, not in helping Marjorie recover, nor in assuaging their worries. If anything, it was Sansa and her wolf who kept them from losing their minds. The girl was convinced that Marjorie would wake soon, and while at first she put it down to hope, she wondered if it was more than that. Jon. Marjorie sighed as she washed her face with the damp cloth, Olenna feeling a smile come to her face as she did so. "Hush, sweetling, rest," she said softly, and felt Marjorie relax and drift off to sleep. Something she did herself after a while, the sound of Marjorie's voice and her movements on the bed waking her. "I take this man," Marjorie said, and when Olenna's eyes cleared, she swore she saw a smile on her granddaughter's face. "My love, my husband," Marjorie said. And Olenna gasped, turning to see Sansa and Allery, who had just walked into the room. Did I just hear that right?" Allery asked, and Olenna motioned to her to keep quiet, though Marjorie spoke nothing further that night. She's dreaming right, of the future, it must be," Sansa said, and both she and Allery nodded in agreement. Thankfully with Willis, she wasn't needed as much as she would have been if it was just Mace running things, her grandson knowing what did and didn't need her attention, and only speaking to her on pressing matters. Even going so far as to interrupt his own time with Marjorie to do so, and she felt her pride rise at helping to raise such a boy. Garland and Leonette came to see her too, and yet when they were there or when Willis was, Marjorie remained silent, not speaking once. When they were gone, though she spoke more and more, she called out for Jon, for her husband more than once. She had them chuckling one night when she had some argument with him in her head, and Sansa practically swooning another when she said how much she missed him. One night as she was sitting with her alone, the words she spoke were more garbled, Olenna needing to move in and place her ear close to her mouth to hear, and what she said stunned her. A tree. They had married in front of a tree, just her granddaughter Jon and his guards, and she felt her anger rise. Had he? Had they? No, it wouldn't. She wouldn't, would she? She called for Loomis and asked him to check, to see if that was what was wrong, if that was something that could have been causing it. The maester looked at her bemused, and Olenna was incredibly annoyed that she had to actually spell it out. Once he'd checked, she was relieved to find that they had not done anything. Marjorie was a maid still, and she had sworn the maester to keep this to himself, warned him what would happen should he not. "My sweet, foolish child," she said, kissing Marjorie's forehead when the maester had left. She knew they wouldn't, Marjorie wouldn't, and Jon, no, the boy was far too dutiful and respectful to do anything that could be considered dishonorable to her granddaughter. Had she not been running a fever and lain to sleep for days, she'd never have even considered it. But she had, and so it meant that Olenna had to, knowing full well that the first time could be painful and that other issues could arise from it too. They all breathed huge sighs of relief when Marjorie awoke the next day, her granddaughter unsure where or how long she'd been out for. Once Loomis had examined her and found her to be well, and after Marjorie reassured them herself, she had asked the question that had preyed on her mind, finding herself annoyed and angry when her granddaughter lied to her face. "It was a dream, grandmother. I must have dreamt Jon and I were wed," Marjorie said, and Olenna stared at her granddaughter, surprised to see her stare back. "I knew it. I told you so," Sansa said, happy to be proved right. "What was the wedding like? Was it beautiful?" "I bet it was beautiful. Your dress. What was your dress like?" Sansa asked excitedly. "A tale for another time." "Sansa, despite just waking up, you look tired, sweetling. I'll have some food brought, and then you can get your rest," Allery said, kissing her daughter on the cheek. "And no more dreams. You'll be wed soon enough as it is." Her good daughter said, laughing as she turned to leave. Olenna didn't leave, however. She waited until the meal was brought, until Sansa had also kissed Marjorie's cheek before she left. And then she turned to her granddaughter Marjorie, looking at her nervously. "The truth?" she asked simply and to the point. "It is the truth, grandmother. I had a dream about Jon, that was all," Marjorie said. And even though she knew she was lying to her, she said it with such surety that Olenna doubted herself. "So you have not run off and gotten married in secret, without your family, without the people who love you by your side?" she said, trying to guilt Marjorie into telling her the truth. "I would never run off, grandmother," Marjorie said, and she resisted the urge to just shout out that she knew the truth of things. "And you would never marry a boy just so you could do more than just kiss?" she asked, and saw her granddaughter sit up, her thorns on full display when she spoke. "I would never. Jon would never. We're not children, grandmother. We can control ourselves," Marjorie said annoyedly, almost forcing Olenna to laugh. "Indeed," she said, raising her eyebrow. "Of all the things, I've just woken up, and this is how I'm treated." Marjorie pouted. "I'm sorry, sweetling. My worry has robbed me of my senses," she said, hugging her granddaughter and feeling her arms wrap around her. "You know you can tell me anything. Things you may wish to hide. You don't need to, not from me," she whispered. "I know, grandmother." Her granddaughter whispered back, and though she waited, she told her no more. Now. So for moons, it had gone on. She had hinted, cajoled, came right out and asked, and nothing. Her granddaughter had kept the pretense up. Olenna had even gone as far as taking her on a trip to the Godswood, speaking up on perhaps having a dual wedding since Jon was from the north. She had mentioned how she was sure that Lord Stark and Jon's family would no doubt appreciate the gesture, and nothing, not a word. Though in the end that did prove to be the catalyst for her granddaughter's confession, even if at first it was to Sansa and not to her. When she did finally come in and asked to speak to her, Olenna had sensed the worry and trepidation on her face. She knew it was time and allowed her granddaughter to set the pace. "Grandmother, there's something I must speak to you on," Marjorie said. "Is there, sweetling?" she replied as if she was in the dark. "I am. Jon and I, we," Marjorie stuttered before as Olenna looked at her. Her granddaughter took a breath. "We're married, grandmother," she said a moment later, looking to her pensively. "Married after all I said, after how many times I questioned you. You tell me now you're married." She said, her voice raised as she did her best to hold her smirk at bay. "It wasn't planned, grandmother. It just happened. We. Jon." "Oh, grandmother, I'm sorry. I wish to tell you truly. Please, don't be angry with me," Marjorie said, jumping from her seat and running to her, grabbing her tightly as she cried against her shoulder. "Look at me, sweetling. Am I disappointed you didn't confide in me? Yes, but I'm not angry with you," she said, wiping Marjorie's tears. "Truly?" Marjorie asked hopefully. "Truly," she said, smiling. "Now, have you and Jon done anything else I should be aware of?" she said, smirking when Marjorie said, "Would perhaps you are sub what 1930. "We've kissed, grandmother, that's all," Marjorie said, and she nodded, kissing her cheek. Marjorie had explained then what and how it had happened. And even on her most cynical of days, Olenna had found the idea, if not the execution of that idea, romantic. When she knew that she wasn't angry or upset with her, and when she had agreed to go and speak to her mother and tell her the truth, she had then tried to convince her to visit Casterly Rock, pouting when told no. The time wasn't right for a visit. The reasons for one were not readily available, and while Marjorie understood this, it was clear she wasn't pleased. Olenna, trying not to feel a little satisfaction at annoying her granddaughter as payback, even though it was not. Despite everything, the lies, the deceit, one overriding feeling was what Olenna kept feeling. Pride in her granddaughter for keeping it up so long, for keeping up the mummery, for not wilting no matter the pressure she placed her under. She was proud and knew her granddaughter had just taken another step to becoming the queen she would be. "My lady, a letter," Left said, handing her the note. "Who gave this to you?" she asked as she opened it. "A maid, my lady," Leff said, nodding as he walked out of the room, and Olenna read the note. "A dragon roars and lets their flames loose." She reached over and picked up the glass of wine. Taking a sip, she smiled and thought on gray rats running for their lives. The wall 296 AC. Marwyn. Try as he might, he had not been able to fully gain the prince's trust. Loamara assumed it had to do with his reluctance to fully come on board with what was to happen to the conspirators. Yet when Marwyn pointed out that he too had yet to be fully trusted, soon realized that not to be the case. For Marwyn it was clear it was more to do with being a maester than with not being fully committed to seeing men he had once called brothers killed. Despite that, though, just in seeing the dragons, watching as they flew, and as the prince became the first dragon rider in over 100 years, was enough. Seeing how the glass candles worked, finding out that blood was the key, and being unsurprised that his own didn't work was enlightening. The prince showing him warging at a level he couldn't understand were simply mind-blowing, as were the boy's own insights. Magic knows magic, Marwyn. It seeks it out, feels its presence. Melisandre will tell you there is power in king's blood. What she won't tell you is that the more magic in yours, the more power there is. Jay said to him as they spoke on the beach one night. "You believe that being a Targaryen allows you to use magic easier?" he asked. "Not just a Targaryen. Do you know the history of my family, my mother's family?" Jay asked, looking at him. "I know some," he replied, and told him the parts he knew. "Myths and legends are far more based in truth than we ever imagined. In the north, they say, Bran the Builder built the wall, Winterfell, Storm's End. They say my family defeated the Warg King, killed his sons, and then married his daughters. For 8,000 years, the Starks have ruled the north based on Bloodmaester. But is it based on blood right, or because they carry the magic in their blood?" He had pondered on it all the way to the wall, eager for the journey both to see Aemon once again, and because the prince had told him there were books and scrolls there he should read. He and Loamara had both been asked to undertake the journey to the wall, to go there and read about the myths and legends, and to see which were the most prevalent ones, and to also speak to Aemon. Loamara had been like an excited child. He'd known of but not met Aemon Targaryen. He knew that Rhaegar had corresponded with the man and they'd discussed prophecy. He too had written and spoken to Aemon on such things, but never in the flesh. While a small part of him wondered if Jay was having them both leave so they rose no objection to how the maesters were dealt with. But they would not, had not, and even should they, the fate of those men had been sealed once he'd given Jay the names. "How much further?" Loamara asked the man shivering on the horse beside him. "Not far. A day, 2 at most. One of their guards," a Manderly man said. "Thank the gods for that," his old friend said, making Marwyn chuckle. Seeing the wall once again, he thought more on Jay's words. Magic, knows, magic, the king had said, and the wall was magical, of that there was no doubt. How it was built. How did it stand? Why it was built. All of these questions ran through his mind as they rode alongside it. The one he came back to most, though, was whether the magic in the wall was a tangible thing. If so, could it be harnessed or weakened? And what amount of power it may contain. They rested up at a small stream that night, eating well and drinking better, Lannister gold spending well even at the wall. He found his sleep disturbed by strange dreams, fields of ice, and a giant weirwood tree, its blood-red leaves still despite the wind's howls. Upon the branches stood hundreds of ravens, all cawing at him, and he ran as the biggest of them, the one with 3 eyes, from towards him. "Marwyn, Marwyn, wake up!" He heard the voice as he was roughly shaken. "Huh, what?" he said sleepily as he sat up. "That must have been a seriously bad dream you were having," you shouted the whole camp awake, old friend. Loamara said, looking at him with concern. "What?" "Oh, it was nothing strange, though," he said, trying to remember what it was about the birds which had scared him so. He ended up sitting awake by the fire for the rest of the night, not keen to go back to sleep, and tired though he was when they set off the next morning, he felt the better for it. They reached Castle Black that evening, the Lord Commander welcoming the supplies and them, and having his steward show them to rooms before they were taken to see Aemon himself. The maester was blind, aged, and yet there was a spark of life he'd not seen in him in many a year. Something more vital about the man, and when he heard them enter his head, turned to look in their direction. Marwyn watched as he nodded to his steward before asking for ale to be brought, and as the man left Aemon bid them sit by the fire. "Aemon, it's good to see you, old friend," he said warmly. "Would that I could say the same, Marwyn, but alas, my eyes see nothing these days." Aemon chuckled and Marwyn couldn't help but smile. "Aemon, this is Loamara, the former maester of Dragonstone. We've been sent to speak to you by Jon Snow," he said, changing the words at the last minute as the steward walked back in. "That'll be all for the night, Chet. Go get some food and off to bed with you. I can hear your yawning from here." Aemon said, his voice full of mirth. "Thank you, maester," the steward said, glad to be sent away, it seemed. He waited until the man was long gone, even nodding to Loamara to check the door, which he did. Once they were sure they were alone and wouldn't be disturbed, he turned to Aemon and leaned in close. "We've been sent by your nephew, Aemon. He wishes us to help you look into some of the books and scrolls, asks us to read up on the myths and legends, and to see what we can find. To seek what is being written of most there amongst the tales." "The long night," Aemon said simply, catching him and Loamara by surprise. "The long night, Maester Aemon?" Loamara asked. "When I first came here many years ago, I brought some of mine own books, gifts from my brother and other family, but Castle Black and the Night's Watch had its own library. There were accounts of former maesters, lord commanders, and treatise on many subjects, more and more referring to the long night." Aemon said as Marwyn looked to Loamara. "We will need to read them, Aemon. We may be here some time, just to find them all." Marwyn said and heard Aemon laugh. "I allowed my nephew to take some of mine own books with him. Some he found himself drawn to also. After he left, over time I'd find myself drawn to a particular scroll or tome, find myself picking up a book here and there. Over the years I'd ignored it mainly when I felt this way, but after speaking to Jay I no longer did." Aemon said, getting up and asking them to follow. They walked from the room, down some stairs and into a cavern of ice, and he and Loamara looked at each other in stunned silence as the maester lit the candles and the sheer volume of books, scrolls, and tomes was revealed. "Whatever it is my nephew sent you for is in there. I shall be glad of your company. It seems we'll be spending quite some time together, old friend," Aemon said, and Marwyn couldn't do anything other than nod. Casterly Rock, 296 AC. Tyrion. He was scared. He thought he was nervous. He was sure of it. But the truth of the matter was, he's scared. When the raven came from Oberyn saying that Arianne had set off, he'd felt excited. He couldn't wait to see her again, nor stop himself from smiling at just the thoughts of it. But when the news came that the sails had been seen, that the ship would be arriving on the next tide, his nerves and worries took over. Despite reassurance from Jon, he hadn't been able to let go of the idea that time apart was not, as his nephew had called it, a path to true feelings. Instead, it would simply prove those feelings false. Still, he dressed in his best and organized the welcome committee, Jaime giving him the honor of doing so along with Kevin, and now as he went down in the lift, he steadied himself. "I thought you'd never make it," Jon japed as he walked from the lift. "I couldn't let you all have all the fun, Sorella. Will you be joining me in the carriage?" He asked, hoping that she would, and he'd not have to ride alone to Lannisport. "I'm afraid not, my lord. I feel the need to ride today," Sorella said, smiling at him, which he returned. As he walked to the carriage, he felt Jon's footsteps behind him, and he stopped before he got in, waiting to hear what his nephew would say. "You are Tyrion of House Lannister, of House Targaryen, a prince, a hand, and a soon-to-be dragon rider, and you are more than enough for any woman, even a princess," Jon whispered in his ear, and he smiled at his nephew as he climbed into the carriage. Ever since their talk, he had taken more and more of a role in things, his duties to both houses keeping him occupied and surprising him. He and Jaime had discussed what would happen if a conflict arose and if House Lannister's needs and the king's clashed. His brother, turning to him, had laughed. He were the crown, as hand to the king. That's what was most important, and so it would be the crown they looked to first. What if they clash, though? What if what's beneficial to the crown is not to our house? He asked. I think our house has benefited enough with Jon, not on the throne. Do you really think we'll suffer when he takes it, or in putting him there? As the carriage traveled at speed to Lannisport, he wondered, though. Jon had told him he was a wolf and a dragon, and Tyrion wondered it, that made him a lion and one. If it ever came to it, who was his loyalty to? His brother who he loved from the moment he was born, or his nephew who had fulfilled his lifelong dream? Today it seemed he'd have no time to answer that question, as far too soon the carriage pulled into Lannisport and he was at the docks before he knew it. Come, we've got a princess to greet. Jon japed as he opened the door, Sorella and Sir Arthur standing close by. Very well if I must, he said, rolling his eyes, forcing Jon to laugh loudly as they walked to the dockside. Once they reached it, they waited, Kevin, arriving a few moments after they did, and when he saw the golden spear piercing the red sun on the sails, he smiled. She was here. It seemed to take forever for the ship to pull into the dock, then longer for the Dornish party to appear on deck, and even longer for him to finally see her. As soon as he did, though he couldn't see anything else, his smile was bigger than it had been in moons as she walked down the gangplank. Princess Arianne, welcome to Lannisport, his Uncle Kevin said. Lord Kevin, an honor to meet you, Arianne said with a curtsy. My nephew, Lord Tyrion. I believe you've met, Kevin said. And the next thing he knew, she was standing in front of him. Lord Tyrion, a pleasure to see you again, truly, she said, smiling at him, and he was almost speechless, just standing there, taking in the vision she presented in front of him. The dress was Dornish and in the colors of her house, and while by the standards of some of the dresses he had seen her wear, it was demure compared to dresses in the West, it was scandalous. Every inch of her figure was clearly outlined, and since Tyrion had intimate knowledge of what the body beneath it looked like, she may as well have been naked. My lord, she said, her smile still on her face, though it had slipped some. Forgive me, princess. It's truly a pleasure to welcome you here, and I shall do my utmost to ensure your stay is as enjoyable as mine own was when I visited your home, he said, and saw her smile return to its former glory. I shall hold you to that, my lord, she said, her voice dipping as she moved to greet her cousin. She and Sorella hugged and spoke for a few moments, and while she greeted Jon politely and not as enthusiastically as she had Sorella, it was already clear to him that she knew the truth of him, something which, as he walked her back to the carriage, made him wonder, did she also know his own truth? Had Oberyn and Ilaria spoken of it to her? Climbing into the carriage, he was surprised when she got in alone, her ladies, and even her cousin Tyene traveling in one of the others, and so he nervously climbed in beside her. They had no sooner set off than he felt her hand on his thigh, her lips on his, and all doubts he had that she wished to continue where they'd left off were quickly forgotten. I've missed you, my lion. Have you missed me? She asked when she finally stopped kissing him, her eyes looking directly into his. Every day, he said, and the smile she gave him made him grab her face to kiss her even more deeply than she had him. By the time they'd arrived back at Casterly Rock, she was pouting. Only his whispered promise that tonight he'd do whatever she wished was enough to remove it from her face. It wasn't that he was averse to the idea of coupling in the carriage, nor even that they'd not have the time to enjoy the experience. It was that he wished to savor it. He longed to explore every inch of her, and to use his lips to kiss as much of her as he possibly could. Besides, my tongue is supposed to do the work that your poor fingers have had to do without it, is it not? He whispered in her ear and felt himself rise at the shudder she gave when he did so. At the rock, he allowed her the chance to settle in, Sorella and Tyene walking off with her in the direction of the guest wing. She had come with a large accompaniment, yet Tyrion found himself surprised by some of them. Her ladies were of houses he'd heard of, Sylvia Santagar, Tyene Sand, who Tyrion had barely greeted. He remembered now, to his great shame. There was also Jane Ladybright and Jane Fowler, along with Janessa Blackmont. Yet the knights and guards she brought were of lesser-known houses, and to Tyrion's surprise were not any of the men she had been surrounded with when he had met her. He resolved to ask her about it later, though he knew that in truth he may not. There were far more pleasurable things for them to discuss or do than speak on men who were not here. "The princess is settled?" he asked his aunt when he walked to his brother's rooms. "She is. I look forward to speaking to her," Jenna said. And he looked at his aunt, wondering if she knew of them. "I think you'll like her, aunt," he said when he figured that she didn't, and was instead speaking more generally. "If she's anything like her uncle, I may indeed, nephew," Jenna said, and he smiled as he thought about his family liking her and tried not to let his mind have the run of itself. Tyrion loved feasts, usually. Tonight, though he did not, protocol demanded that Arianne sit beside his brother, and so Tyrion was sitting with Janessa Blackmont and not the woman he wished. He knew that this was the formal welcome feast, and that next time they could sit wherever they liked, but still, the night seemed never-ending. When the dancing came, he was glad it was his brother who danced with her, his uncle too. He had asked Jon to dance with her, knowing his nephew to be the best dancer among them, and been surprised when the boy refused. Though his nephew's reasons made him appreciate him even more, Jon telling him he disliked seeing Margaery dance with anyone else, so he'd not be the one to dance with Arianne. "My lord, you don't dance?" Janessa asked, her voice a little disappointed. "I find people make fun of my size enough, my lady. To see me dance would be to invite it even more," he said, and while she nodded it was more. He felt that she accepted his answer, then she agreed with it, and so he leaned in closer to her. "However, my lady, if you really wish to dance, there is no better partner than Sir Jon," he said, pointing to his nephew. He resisted the urge to laugh when he saw her walk towards Jon, seeing the blush on Jon's face when she asked, and knowing he'd not be able to refuse. Janessa smiling when his words proved true, and Tyrion, Jaime, and even Arianne all laughing at the attempted hidden scowls when others asked Jon to dance later. It was the hour of the wolf when he moved through the keep, the corridors deserted and the lights dimmer than they were just a few hours earlier. Arriving at the room, the guards gave him a nod, his presence obviously expected, and he was bid to enter without the need to knock. He saw her as soon as he did so, laying on the bed. Her silken small clothes were all she wore, and the look on her face was as predatory as the snakes of her country. "You made me wait," she said with a smirk. "Then I shall endeavor to make the wait worthwhile," he said quickly, undressing. "My eager lion," she said with a small laugh, her voice even more sultry than usual. "You're a hungry lion," he said, and the laugh this time was bigger as he grabbed her legs and began kissing his way up between them. Volantis 296, AC, young Griff. Each day they traveled. He worried that they'd be too late, that just like always they'd miss her and arrive in a place she'd just left. The longest they'd stop was for 2 days in Goyen Drohe, and apart from a day fixing the sails, they'd sailed non-stop, and yet he worried still, even seeing the city in front of him. A part of him feared it to be a wasted journey. Jon seemed unperturbed by his worries, unconcerned, and it annoyed him and had led to more than one argument between them. His foster father not seeming to understand the necessity and droning on and on about the Tyrells and what marriage to Lady Margaery would bring. He loved the man, he truly did, but he had no sense of what it meant to be one of the last dragons, to have the future of his house resting on his shoulders. It had to be his aunt, as only together could they restore the majesty of House Targaryen, a silver prince and princess to bring about a golden age. Had his father lived then, Aegon would have no doubt that he and Daenerys would have been married, even laughing when Septa Lemore suggested that perhaps it would have been he and Rhaenys. "My father would have used my sister to form an alliance to bring a great house closer to the throne, maybe Willis Tyrell or perhaps Quentyn Martell, but he'd have bought their loyalty with her hand," he said with a scoff. "But not with yours? A prince who would be king would surely be a greater prize," Duck said, and he nodded. "True, but I've no doubt my father would wish to see the Valyrian bloodline extended. My sister looked Dornish. My aunt looks like me." I've no doubt that just like our ancestors, my father would have wanted to see our line continue to show that which made us stand out from the others, he said, and Duck seemed to agree, though John and the Septa not so much. John had tried to tell him that even should they arrive in Volantis and find his aunt still to be in the city itself was far too large to be sure they could find her. But Aegon knew where she was. The Red Temple, he would find her there, of that he had no doubt. What connection his aunt had to the Red Priests, or to this Quaith woman, he didn't know, but he did know they were connected. In Norvos he had been furious that they wouldn't allow him into the temple, that the priestess dismissed him so readily. He was Aegon Targaryen, the sixth of his name, the rightful king of Westeros, and these servants of a false god dared deny him. He would ensure that once he sat his rightful throne, once he had dealt with the traitorous lions, wolves, falcons, and stags, that he'd then deal with those in Essos who denied him also. We should rest the night, Aegon, go looking on the morrow, John said when they docked, and he looked at the man incredulously. 4 moons we've traveled, John. I'll not wait any longer than necessary. We look tonight. He said, his voice as full of determination as he could make it. Very well, John said, though Aegon could hear the reluctance in his voice, and it annoyed him. You should stay here, Duck, and I will go, he said. And when John protested, he shot him a look which seemed to do the trick, though he disliked the way he stormed off down below deck. Fixing his sword to his side and dressing in his best clothing, he, Duck, and Halden left the Shy Maid and were soon walking the streets of Volantis. Halden, informing him of the cultures of the Volanten and of their feelings on walking in the city, how they felt it beneath men and women of their substance to do so. While he thought that was a silly idea, he found he agreed with it partly also. Men and women of substance needed to be shown to be above those lesser than them, and kings he felt even more so. Seeing the Red Temple, he was amazed by its size. He had thought the one in Volantis to be big, but compared to this, it was like looking at a home and then a castle. Large crowds surrounded it, and they needed to jostle their way to the entrance. Walking inside, he was as impressed with it as he had been the exterior, though not so much when he asked to speak to the High Priest and was denied. I demand to speak to the High Priest, he said angrily, and the girl just shook her head. Only R'hllor makes demands of his priests, not men, and certainly not boys, she said. And as she turned to walk away, he grabbed her shoulder, spinning her towards him. Don't walk away from me, he said angrily, and around him, people stopped, and the large room he was in quietened. Griff, we should go, Duck said, and he glared at him angrily before turning back to the girl. The woman who arrived was perhaps the most beautiful he'd ever seen, dark-haired and eyed, and she exuded confidence which only made her more attractive, he felt. Though the look she gave him, and the way she and the guards with her shook their heads, soon had his anger rising. Who was she to look at a dragon that way? Who were they, he thought, and yet he knew, should it come to it, he was outnumbered. You are not welcome here, false dragon. Go now in peace, or suffer a god's wrath, the woman said, and he looked at her, perplexed. False dragon. What did she mean by that? I've come to talk to the High Priest, to ask him questions, he said, standing his ground and trying not to gulp when the men around him moved quickly, the guards surrounding him, Duck and Halden, very easily. We have no answers for you here, no desire to set you on a path to your destruction. Go and go in peace, she said, turning away. Daenerys Ta, he said, but never got to finish or ask the woman if his aunt was here, the guards removing them from the temple and the time it took him to realize she was gone. As they were just about outside, though, he saw her. Her silver hair was long and thick, her face more beautiful than even in his dreams. He felt his heart quicken, felt his breeches tighten as he looked at the beautiful dress and imagined the body beneath it. He called to her, but she ignored him, and he cursed the dye in his hair, knowing that had she seen him for who he truly was, that she'd have then spoken to him right away. Walking back to the Shy Maid, his anger was replaced by something different. Hope. He had found her. She was here, and soon they'd be together. Soon they'd be wed. Then together they'd return and take their family's throne and make those who turned on his family pay. While Duck and Halden looked at him in confusion, Aegon smiled as they walked and almost ran the last few steps up the gangplank when they arrived. "We found her. Jon. She's here," he said excitedly when he saw Jon walk up from below deck. "You spoke to her?" Jon asked, then he shook his head as Duck explained what had happened. "How do you know it was her, Aegon?" "If you saw her only for a moment," Jon asked, "and another day it would have annoyed him. But for now, he was happy to answer the question." "I know, Jon. I saw her. She's my aunt, and she's here. We need to find a way to speak to her, and this must go," he said with his hands in his hair. "Aegon, you can't. The disguise keeps you safe," Jon said. But he wasn't listening to his complaints anymore and just shook his head. After they had eaten and he'd gone to bed, he lay there, his eyes closed and his hand traveling down his body. Feeling his stiffness, he groaned as he tried to picture her in his mind. Her silver hair, her body, his soon-to-be wife. His hand began to move of its own accord, and he felt himself getting closer to his release. He pictured her face as he did so, and especially her eyes. Gods, her eyes. Never before had he seen such eyes, one green and one blue. He heard himself shout her name as he spent. "Daenerys," Aegon said as he fell back against the bed. "The Citadel 29-6 AC. Theobald." He looked over the notes in front of him, his life's work, and he smiled proud of his achievements. He had seen the dragons brought low, seen them finally humbled. Now, apart from an old man who'd die alone at the wall and 2 orphans with no means who were stuck in faraway lands, they were done. The Targaryens and their beliefs, their potential, were no more, and magic was back where it belonged, locked away in their vaults. They had a fool for a king now. But fools were easy to control, and Robert's appetites were those of a man, and not a family who thought themselves gods. The reports on the prince were troubling, though madmen too were easily controlled. Still, perhaps it would be for the best if the younger son took over, something he'd discuss when next they met. Reading of Vyman's disappearance had given him pause, but it had also reassured him after Kraelin's and Kalot's deaths. Had he been another of their member, he would have had no choice but to investigate. 2 deaths were suspicious enough as it was. 3 would have been too many. But Vyman was nothing to do with them. And while Kalot had caused distress, they had managed to replace him correctly. In Kraelin, they'd lost a valuable member, and due to that fool Marwyn's interference, he still felt sure that the man had done something to make some of them ill. They'd not got their man in the rock. "Samwell, is Archmaester Vaelin busy?" "Chapter?" he asked, turning to the young boy. "I believe he and Archmaester Gallard have gone to visit Lord Hightower, Archmaester," Samwell said. Theobald looked at him strangely, finding it odd. The man would do such a thing. "Are you sure, Samwell?" he asked, and the fat boy nodded before explaining some more. "I believe so, Archmaester. I delivered the letters to them myself," he said. "Could you bring me one of them, Samwell? It's most odd for the Lord to ask for a visit." "Of course, Archmaester," Samwell said, and he was glad to see the boy hurry off. He had been surprised when the boy had returned, but he'd been glad of it too. He and the others had wagered that the boy would stay with his family and not come back. When he did, though, Theobald decided to bring him close. The boy had worked closely with the mage, and in time he knew he'd get him to divulge some of Marwyn's secrets. He actually found that despite his clumsiness and size, Samwell was a bright young lad eager to learn and a bit of an unpolished gem. One day he'd perhaps a suitable candidate to be brought into the order, as his demeanor would make him a useful spy. He drank some wine as he went over his latest treatise, A Definitive History of Westeros, a work that when finished would show the dragons for what they truly were, incestuous madmen who were cruel and dangerous. As he was rereading the last chapter that he'd finished, this one dealing with Aegon the Unworthy, he heard Samwell walk back in and saw the letter in his hand. "Will there be anything else, Archmaester?" the boy asked, and he shook his head, waiting until Samwell had left before reading the letter. "Archmaester Vaelin, I find myself in need of your counsel and that of Archmaester Gallard also. As a man expert in the field of the study of the heavens, a study close to my own heart, and as Archmaester Gallard is known for his work on the Summer Isles, I have great need of you both." We received a recent arrival in Old Town, a prince from the Summer Isles, a man who shares my own interest in the stars, and with whom I've found my knowledge lacking. I'd like to discuss some things with you both before the man returns from a hunt he's on with my son. Your help in this matter is greatly appreciated, and should I be able to do anything in return, then you only need ask. Lord Leighton Hightower, defender of the Citadel. He reached over and poured himself another glass of wine, happy in the knowledge that the Order was still making friends and wondering about the boon Velen may ask of Lord Leighton. After finishing his reading and feeling hungry, he went to join the others for the evening meal, surprised to see that Valen and Gallard had yet to return, and calling Samuel to find out why. It was much later when the boy returned, Samuel having gone to the High Tower himself to speak to the Archmaesters, much to Theobald's approval. Lord Leighton asked them to stay the night, Archmaester. I believe the hunt finished early, and the Prince from the Summer Isles was pleased to speak to such learned men as Archmaesters Valen and Gallard, Samuel said, and he felt himself smile at that. Thank you, Samuel. You've been most helpful. We really must speak more in your future. I see only good things ahead of you, he said, patting the boy on his back as he walked into his room. The Fall of the Maesters, 296 AC, Casterly Rock, John. In the moons since he had returned from Highgarden, he had been busy, more on certain things than others, and had been glad that he'd approached Tyrion how he had, having Tyrion make certain decisions, ones he had first ran by him but soon didn't, had shown him the benefits and given him the time to do the other things he needed to do. He and Melisandre had talked more about the Red God, and he knew enough now, he felt, that should Barrett be drawn that way, he'd be able to perhaps bring him on side, and if not, he still felt sure he could make the man see things from his perspective. Marwyn and Loamara he had sent to his uncle. He needed them to do the research he had not been able to do. With Tyrion helping, he had finally gotten around to reading some of his father's letters for himself, some making him laugh and others bringing him to tears as he saw how much his parents loved each other. Over and over, though, was the sense that being the prince that was promised meant more, and Melisandre had confirmed that. Loamara had too, but mainly it was Walder who made him see. Walder, did Nan speak to you on the long night? He asked. Aye, she did. The prince that was promised will bring the dawn and save us from the long night, Walder said, and John shuddered. He needed to go back to Winterfell to look at those drawings once more, to see if the library there contained more, but before that he knew there would be some answers to be found at the wall. He and Rhaenys had flown more together, the bond growing ever stronger each time they took to the sky, and they'd flown even further, testing her range, seeing when and how soon she got tired. John had also gotten more comfortable flying on her back, the movements, twists, turns, and drops all allowing him to feel even more ready. One night they'd flown until the early morn, arriving back at the beach as dawn rose. Just seeing the sun come up from the back of a dragon was more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. He had felt his son's excitement knowing it was almost time for his own rider, and felt Rhaenys's also, as she now felt ready to take others on her back. As they had come closer to the shore, he'd warred into a gull and had it fly over the rock, holding tight to Rhaenys's horn as he did so. Sovegon Lenton, Rhaenys, Emi Judah. Fly home, Rhaenys, we have time, he said, and she flew and landed near the cave. Soon he was falling asleep against her back as she rested. He had written to Marjorie, his wife, and it made him have to stop himself from calling her that in the letters, though never in his heart. He'd sent letters to Sansa and Robb, to Arya and Bran, spent time with Joy, and sparred with Arthur and Jaime. He'd watched as Joanna had celebrated her name day, and as she began to grow, and found himself looking forward to seeing her walk and hearing her talk. Mostly, though, he practiced the writing and made sure it matched. He studied the parchment, making sure it was the same, and he warred into the ravens, making sure he could send them where they needed to go. Once he was certain he could do what was needed, he contacted Richard and made the preparations. His men were in position, his allies on board, and the time had come. Rhaenys, it's time, he said as he sat beside her in the cave. Arthur, Jors, and Jaime waiting outside with Loras and Brienne. For our family, Rhaenys said. For our family, he said, closing his eyes. Old Town 296 AC, Sir Richard. The cawing of the bird as it landed him made him smile. For almost 3 weeks he'd waited. He'd arrived early to make sure it was all in place, and had first made his way to the citadel and spoken to Samwell Tarly, the boy eager to help, though he knew not the extent of what that help would be. After that, he had taken a room and waited. He had answered some of his lips' requests, sent out orders, but in reality he was simply killing time. 4 and 10, in the end. That's what it came down to. 4 and 10 men who posed the biggest danger to the restoration out of any in Westeros. He wondered had it always been this small, and then remembered that the 2 who had fallen were part of it. But even with them, it was astounding that so few carried out so much, that they were responsible for so much destruction and loss of life, that they so hated everything his king represented, felt abhorrent to him. 4 and 10 located throughout Westeros, and to take them down, it would take many more. Dorne, the North, the Riverlands, the Reach, Crownlands, and the Vale, in almost every region his men were ready, and it would start now. Gathering his things, he met with his man and made sure the ship was ready. He would sail north after this, the work that needed to be done there next on his agenda. Important work, he knew. But for his king, what would happen here tonight, what would happen in Westeros over the next week, was even more so. We're ready, his men said, and he nodded before entering the small boat that was taking him to the citadel. His men, waiting under the bridge for their own targets. Both, and make it look good, he said simply as he walked into the scribe's hearth and met with Samwell, handing him the letter. He waited. It didn't take long. Seeing the men walk out, he almost laughed at the arrogance. To stroll around without guards, the sheer fucking hubris of it. That alone would be the downfall of these men, and he took his seat and took out his food, listening to the men as those around him made their deals. Books being sold, letters being written. He even laughed when an acolyte came close to him to tout for business before he saw his clothing. As night fell, he made his way into the seneschal's court itself and saw Samwell beckon him to follow. The gray robe he wore and the maester's chain were those of a newly linked maester, one not many would know, and walking and talking with Samwell they spoke as if he knew what he was saying. Soon he was being shown the table where Theobald sat, and from then it was just a matter of needing to wait for the right time. Dorne, 296 AC, Sunspear, Oberyn. When the raven arrived carrying the note, he had smiled. For moons he had walked on eggshells around the new maester, had made sure all the others had too. He'd allowed the man to sit in on meetings that a maester would be expected to, and apart from not being allowed to look after Doran, which the maester had objected to. The maester, for all intents and purposes, was the senior maester in Dorne. However, he was not. Miles did most of the true maester's duties. He handled the more sensitive of correspondence and managed Doran's treatments. Pauron did not, was not under any circumstances allowed, to treat but the minor ailments of any of their family, and over time, Oberyn knew he'd become suspicious. Not that he'd ever get that time. As soon as the raven arrived, Oberyn had Sir Daemon and Obara take up position and sent the raven to Ironwood. Once that was done, he gave the signal, and his daughter in sworn shield grabbed the maester and dragged him to the large empty room, where Oberyn was waiting for him. "What is the meaning of this? Should the Citadel find out you've treated me this way?" the maester said, and Oberyn chuckled. "You really think the Citadel or anyone will ever hear from you again, maester? I knew you people were stupid, but surely not that stupid," Oberyn said. "Why, I've done nothing." "What?" Pauron said, his voice full of panic now. "True, you've not done anything to me or my family, simply because you've not had the opportunity. You should be grateful for that fact. It'll only be your life you lose today, maester, and it will be quick. For others in your order, they will not be so lucky." "What?" "Please," the man said, and Oberyn nodded as he was brought to the ground. Picking up the sword, he stepped to one side. Oberyn looked to Daemon, to Obara, and Nymeria as he moved forward, Doran sitting in the corner with Ariel looking on from a distance. "In the name of his grace, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, I, Prince Oberyn Nymeros Martell, do hereby sentence you to die." The sword was quick and precise, and Obara and Daemon let go of the man's arms as soon as the blade severed his head. Oberyn wiped the blade off and smiled before he closed his eyes. He thought of his nephew and his niece, of Elia and Aegon, and of all the people these men would have wished to see dead. Opening his eyes, he hoped the rest of Jay's plan went as smoothly as it did here. Urinewood, 296 AC, Otar. He didn't understand what had happened, how had it happened, and what was to happen now. He was tied to the wall, the chains firm and unyielding, and standing in front of him. Anders was picking through items he knew well. Items he was beginning to realize the man was going to use on him, and he didn't know why. He had brought him the scroll from Sunspear, Prince Oberyn's sigil bound to get a rise out of the easily excitable young lord, especially given how he'd ranted and raved after the prince had left a few moons ago. Handing the lord the scroll, he saw the smile and prepared to offer his advice, though he never got the chance to. One minute he was standing looking at the lord as he walked towards him, and the next he was being beaten into unconsciousness. When he woke, he was tied to the wall, and he was baffled how he'd gotten there. They couldn't know, could they? He'd been so careful. For years he'd been careful, and he'd only offered advice when the Lord was in the mood to listen, speaking in his ear of how having Quentin Foster was a good opportunity, and how a man made a better ruler than a woman, and enjoying seeing his ideas take root. When I was a boy, my grandfather used to tell me stories, tales of my family and what we once were before the Roinar came. Anders said, walking towards him, the object in his hand making Otar shake. "Please, my lord," he said. But Anders wasn't listening. "You know my grandfather loved House Martell. He loved them. He instilled that love in me and my father, and you took that and him away from him." Anders said, and Otar gulped. "Lies. It was the Viper, the prince. He poisoned him," Otar said, shaking his head. "I will get the truth from you before this night is over. Maester, I swear it on my grandfather." Anders said, and Otar screamed as the man moved closer, the point digging deep into his shoulder, and soon the pain became almost unbearable. The desert was cool, almost chilly, the moon high in the night sky as he was dragged through it. How long they'd been riding for he didn't know, nor where he was now. The pain was numb now, but he felt it still, or he thought he did. Anders was right. Gods, the things he'd done to him. Any many would talk, and he had done so quickly. So eager was he for the pain to stop. It didn't, though. On it went for hours and hours, long after he had told the man everything he knew and had done. He had passed out and been woken back up. He'd been beaten, burned, cut, and still, it wasn't enough. He was actually relieved when they took him out to the horses. Ahead of him, Anders had stopped, and he saw him looking down into something, and as he was dragged in front of him, Otar tried to get his eyes to focus. "You took my grandfather from me. Fuck you to the 7 hells," Anders said as he kicked him in the chest. The fall wasn't as hard as he expected it to be, the hole not as deep as he had feared, and as he reached out and tried to rise to his feet, Otar felt he may actually have a chance to live. He could get out of here and maybe be able to make his way back to the Citadel. As long as they left him before morning, he would have a chance, which was when he felt it, and then he heard the hiss. The first bite was bad, the second worse, and as the clouds that covered the moon moved away, the light shone down. There were hundreds of them. They crawled over him, moved towards him, and as the moon's light faded, he looked into one of the sets of eyes that were closest to him. His bladder emptied, and it seemed to excite them, and as the bites became too numerous to count, as the poison raced through his veins, his final thought was, where did they find so many red ones? Riverlands, 296 AC, Stone Hedge. Maester Lothar. The man ran through the fields, feeling them close behind him, wondering who they were and what they wanted. He had thrown his pouch of gold at them, yet they had still chased him. And Lothar was beginning to think they weren't bandits after all. The Raven had arrived with Theobald's message, and he had hurried off to the meeting, never bothering to ask himself why he was being recalled. He had instead bid Lord Jonas farewell, for now, said he'd be back within the moon, and had set off from Stonehenge to ride to Seaguard. Traveling alone was a risk he knew, but he couldn't allow the Lord to know where he was going, and so he had taken the chance. As he tripped and fell over the broken branch and the men caught up with him, he felt a fool for doing so, and hoped it would not cost him more than a beating. "Please, I gave you my coin. I have nothing else to give." Lothar said and saw the clubs the men held in their hands. "It's not your coin we want, we serve a higher calling," the man said as the first blow beat down upon him. On and on they came, and as each one did, he wondered why. In the midst of his pain, he wondered why. And as he breathed his last breath, he found to his dismay that he would never know. Raventry Hall, Maester Martin. When the Raven arrived, he made his preparations. A meeting was something he'd not been a part of in many years, and so something important must be going on. He found himself excited to be going back to the Citadel. To see his old friends once more would have been enough to cause it. Knowing that something must be getting decided, though, that made him even more eager to travel. It took a day or so to get Lord Tytos' permission, and no matter how much he complained, it was only after agreeing to take guards with him that he was allowed to leave. Lord Tytos telling him that since he was in his service, it was up to him to see to his safety. Had he not found the man to be a dullard then? He may have appreciated it. As it was, it simply inconvenienced him. "Are you ready, Maester?" Tom said, and he nodded as they rode out the gate. They made good time. As they camped that night, Tom and Ardos told tales, some which even made him chuckle, and after eating, he slept comfortably. They were riding the next morning when the men arrived, wearing House Tully colors and carrying a letter from Lord Tytos. "We need the Maester to come with us. The Lady Catelyn is taken ill and needs his help. He may be needed for some time." The large man in the lead said, "Very well, we'll ride there first, Maester." "Aye," he said reluctantly, knowing he had no choice. "Lord Tytos requests you both to ride back to Raventry Hall. The Maester can send a raven when he's ready to leave, and you have your own duties to see to," the large man said, and Tom looked ready to argue. "Go, Tom, sir." He looked to the man who introduced himself as Sir Robert Loam. "Robert will ensure I arrive safely, and if he's right, then it could be some time until I can resume my travels," he said, glad of the opportunity to get rid of his guards and hoping the detour wouldn't take too long. "If you're sure, Maester?" Tom asked. I am," he said with a smile, and Tom and Ardos rode off. He rode on with the men who told him of the woman's symptoms, and so he asked to stop off to collect some herbs. He was worried in case they may not have them, and he didn't wish to delay more than necessary. He was collecting them near the stream when it happened, the gauntlet gripping tight around his neck and pushing him forward, the water going into his mouth. He felt the constriction of his lungs as they filled, and he thrashed to no avail, the man far too large and much too strong. As his movements stilled, as his last breaths came, he couldn't understand why House Tully would wish him dead. The Reach 296 AC, the Rose Road, Maester Arden. He had been lucky. The Raven arrived while Lord Tarley was on a hunt with his son. Had he been there, then nothing he'd have said would have made the man agree to let him return to the Citadel. As it was with him gone, the lady was only too keen to see him go, even more so when he suggested that he could carry a letter to her fat son and that he'd bring one back upon his return. The truth of the matter was he was glad for the opportunity of seeing Theobald and the others. His time in the Reach had been an absolute waste. Randall Tarley cared little for his insights or suggestions, even when he gave them on military matters. The man barely acknowledged him. Though as bad as it had been previously, it had gotten even worse since his son was sent to the Citadel, the man seeming to blame him for it somehow. As if he had anything to do with sending the fat boy there. True, he was clever and could perhaps make a good maester, but the boy was soft and wouldn't have the heart to do what was needed to ensure the realm ran true. So he intended to make his points clear to the others once he arrived at the Citadel. After bidding the lady farewell, he made his way as quickly as he could to the Rose Road, hoping to meet up with Kate so they could travel together. He couldn't believe his luck when not more than an hour after arriving he heard the horse behind him, and he smiled when he saw his old friend riding hard, though he soon looked on in shock when he saw the arrow in his back, and he began to panic when he saw the look of fear on his face. "Ride. They mean to kill us, ride," Kate shouted, and as he turned to kick his horse, he felt the thump of the arrow as it hit his chest, his fingers drawn to it almost instinctively. As the second and the third arrows hit him, he looked to Kate's, who was riding on ahead, and watched on in horror as his friend's horse suddenly bucked, throwing him from it. Kate's, though. Not the only one to hit the ground. As soon he fell too, his eyes fading as the blood flowed from his wounds. Who the men were he didn't know, nor were they about to tell him. The last thing he heard as the sword entered his neck was one voice yelling to the other, "Aye, he's dead. Broke his neck. Wonder what spooked the horse." The voice shouted as Arden was welcomed by the darkness. White Harbor, 296 AC. Wyman. When Morale arrived with the other man, Wyman knew it was time. The fall of men who deserved it was upon them. He had voted for this. John had asked for their decisions, and he had voted, and he felt relieved it was happening finally. Knowing who Theomore truly served, he felt greatly relieved, and so he waited until night fell, and then escorted the man to the maester's rooms. What happened inside them he didn't know. Only that when he walked inside, the maester was dead and there were no marks or signs of a struggle. Theomore looked as if he died peacefully in his sleep, and Wyman thanked John for that concession. It wasn't that he didn't wish the man to suffer, or even that he couldn't have covered it up, but more, he didn't wish the girl who found his body to be more upset than need be. "The others?" he said to Morale as they walked from the maester's rooms. "We'll know soon enough. Have no fear, my lord. They will fall, all of them," Morale said. "And should they not?" he asked, his voice and face showing his concern. "There is always tomorrow or the day after. Trust me, my lord. Those men are not long for this world." He was breaking his fast the next morning when the scream came. He and Willis being informed, and Wyman telling his granddaughters and Rob later on. While upset, they accepted that the man had died peacefully in his sleep, and Wyman even gave the man a far better send-off than he deserved, saying words over his body and in front of his servants, and asking them to give a moment to the man. "When do you think we'll know, Father?" Willis asked a little later that night. "Soon, Willis, soon." The Vale, 296 AC, Maester Coleman. Gods. The woman had been insufferable. He'd needed to wait until Nestor's own maester had arrived, and still she'd complained. Accused him of abandoning her boy, of leaving him alone, and he sighed as he listened to her. Even lying to her about the letter, saying it was from her husband ordering him to come to King's Landing, and it almost hadn't been enough. Eventually, though he'd gotten to leave and been escorted to Gulltown to the ship that would take him on the first part of his journey. He'd unfortunately need to change ships in King's Landing and should. And he had no doubt she would, Lysa complained to her husband. Then he'd need to make an explanation, but he had no choice other than to lie to the woman, as she'd never have allowed him to leave otherwise, and he so wished to speak to his friends in person once more. As he stood on the deck watching the moon set, he smiled. How many years had it been since he had set foot in the Citadel? 20 and 2, 20 and 3. He wasn't sure, but he was very happy to be going back there once again. "You look happy, friend." "But Jam," the man said, walking and standing beside him. I'm to meet up with some old friends," he said with a chuckle. "Good when you do. Bid them hello from me." The man said, and he looked at him confused before he felt the blow to his head, and with no ceremony he was thrown overboard, the water covering him in moments. He struggled against the current, tried to reach the top, the blood flowing from his head making him weak. As he reached the top, he looked to see the ship far off to the distance, the whiteness of the sails all he could see in the dark of the night, and he felt himself sink once more. Try as he might, he couldn't rise again. His body was too old and weak, his wound cut too deep, and he felt the coolness and calm of the water swallow him whole. The Vale, 296 AC, Maester Jaspar. Where had they come from? He wondered as he rowed hard. He was too close to Iron Oaks for them to attack, surely? Though he also knew that he wasn't close enough and that he'd not outrun them. Their horses were faster than his own, and like a fool, he had forsaken guards, too eager to travel quickly and not to be found out. He had wondered how many others would he meet. Was it to be a full meeting? A conclave within a conclave, and he knew for it to be called something big must have happened. What that was, he feared he'd never find out, as the men chased him down. He looked back, and to his horror saw that the leader was wearing ears around his neck. Though it could have been worse, at least they weren't burned men. He rode as fast as he could, but in the end, it was useless. They rode him down, and nothing he said would stop the mountain clansmen in their tracks. He screamed as he was held down, as his ears were removed and as they beat him. But when it stopped, he felt some relief, short-lived though it was. Feeling the blade in his stomach, he looked at the man in shock, though the pain was something he felt even more when the blade was then twisted and his stomach opened. "Why, you've taken my ears. You don't kill. Black ears don't kill," he cried. "Who said we were black ears?" The man said, and he knew by his voice that this was no clansman, though who he was he'd never lived to find out. King's Landing 296 AC, Barristan. Murder without trial was not something he agreed with, usually. Sure, there were exceptions. The mountain and Lorch deserved no due process to his mind. When he'd first been told by Richard's man about Bicel, though he had thought the man needed to face a trial, it was only after speaking to Richard himself and finding the full extent of what he did that he changed his mind. "I know there is nothing more in this world that the king would wish for than to see that man brought to trial, Barristan. Nothing," Richard said. "Then why?" he asked, confused. "What he did, what these men did, must be dealt with. They must face a reckoning, and we must do it before Jaehaerys sits the throne. We cannot risk it, Barristan. Not one of them can be allowed to escape," Richard said, reaching over and touching his shoulder. I know, old friend. It's why I do not ask you to do this yourself, much though I'm sure you'd wish to if you heard him confess. Instead, leave it to my man. We'll take care of it," Richard said, and he nodded. When he had found out how they had planned to do it, he had been concerned for the girl's safety, only to be reassured that once he saw her from the Red Keep, that she would be well taken care of. He had been given his king's word that the life she'd lead would be far better than the one she'd had until now. Standing outside the room, he waited, and when she came out, he hurried along with her, meeting Richard's man, Marius, outside. "Is it done?" Marius asked her. "It is. He drank it all down and was gone before I left," Pycelle's serving girl said. "You..." Pycelle's serving girl. "Good girl. Have you decided?" Marius asked. "Customere, my lord," the girl said, and Barristan watched as Marius smiled before handing her a pouch. The girl happy to hear the jingle of coins, and for Barristan looking at her face when she looked inside, even happier now. "Sir Barristan, I bid you farewell," Marius said as he and the girl walked off into the night. And Barristan, as he turned to head back, found himself thinking that he'd never even asked her name. The next morning the Red Keep was in an uproar, though the king and queen seemed unperturbed. The king simply asking with no respect or concern for the dead Grand Maester, for Jon Arryn to make sure that a new one was sent quickly, Robert then continuing on his way. No one grieved for the man, and Barristan found that apt. Despite serving for 40 years, the man had served no king. He'd done no good, and caused great harm to those he had sworn to keep healthy. Barristan had found he had slept with a clear conscience the night before, happy that a threat had been removed and knowing that his king was one step closer to the throne. Old Town 296 AC, Maesters Vaelin and Gallard. Vaelin had been surprised by the request, and that it concerned Gallard even more so. However, an invite from the Lord was not one they could reject or turn down and could be a boon to their order. So he had made his way to Gallard, and both men had left to walk to the high tower. They were walking over the bridge when the man came to them. He was very well dressed, and in his hand he was carrying a pouch of gold. "Please, my child, I need a maester," the man said, and they directed him back towards the citadel. "Please, a moment, just a moment, I'll pay you whatever you wish," the man said, and Vaelin looked to Gallard, who nodded. Coin didn't particularly interest him, but the man looked important, and when he nodded and the man handed him the pouch which he handed to Gallard, it was his friend's stunned reaction that sealed it for him. "There are over 50 gold dragons in this pouch, Vaelin," Gallard said softly to him, the amount catching him by surprise. "What's your name?" he asked the man as they followed him. "Lord Jorah Mormont, Maester. My wife and I were to visit her father, though we decided to come to the citadel first. Then our babe took sick, Please, this way," he said, directing them towards a small boat. A boon indeed, Valen thought with a smirk. And yet, as they walked towards the boat, something felt wrong. Mormonts were from the north, and this man sounded anything but. He paused and turned to ask the man, "You don't sound northern, my lord." And Gallard looked at him confused before they were quickly surrounded by men who had seemingly come from nowhere. "And you two are no true maesters either. We'll be a good match on our trip then, won't we?" the man said as he smirked. And before he knew what was happening, he and Gallard were bundled up with hoods over their heads. In no more than a few moments, they were in a boat that rowed quickly from the riverbank. How long they rowed, for he didn't know, only that the Honeywine's currents felt stronger. When the hood was removed, he found Gallard was nowhere to be seen. Where his friend was, he didn't know. What he did know was that he shivered when the man moved toward him and cut his binds. "Your friend is dead. Say hello to him. For me, will you?" the man said, and without so much as a blink, he felt his throat being cut, the blood pouring out as he was thrown overboard. He didn't last long, and as he choked on his own blood, the last thing he saw was Gallard's body as it floated by. The Citadel 29-6 AC. Maester Walgrave. The cage was open. Why had he left it open again? He moved to close it, and saw the others were open too. Strange. He'd not have opened them all, surely? Though his mind was not what it had once been. He loved his birds, and they loved him. He'd not risk them, harm them, and certainly he'd never let them loose indoors, would he? Yet as he looked now at the cages, he saw the ravens fly from them. It was a beautiful sight, at least at first. But soon he noticed something strange with their eyes. Ravens didn't have white eyes. They were blue or gray or brown depending on their age, never white. No one knew that better than he. For all his life he'd studied these birds and written about them. To see them now, all looking at him with white eyes, was disturbing. He felt his fear begin to rise and turned to walk from the room. For the first time in his life, he was actually afraid of his own birds. The cawing soon began, and he hurried, running to the stairs. Every step he took, he looked over his shoulder and expected them to be there, to be following. Then, as he reached the steps, they flew as one. They enveloped him, and for the briefest moment, he flew. The only thing louder than the cawing of the ravens was the flapping of their wings, and the noise was deafening. It was so loud that no one heard his screams or the crack of his skull as he hit the bottom of the stairs, and no one cared about the rattle his throat made as he died. Maester Theobald. He had been in the midst of peaceful sleep. The dream he was having was one of the nicer ones, and he'd enjoyed it until the noise woke him up. He tried to sit up, but felt pressed down hard against the bed, the pillow pushing down against his face. He couldn't breathe. He felt the lack of air beginning to wear on him, and he struggled unsuccessfully to free himself. Theobald was not a fighter, and whoever was forcing him to the bed was strong, yet he fought hard for his life, or he thought he did. In reality, his blows hit the pillow and not the man, and even had they'd have been ineffectual. As he heard the sound which had woken him quieten, he wondered why he had thought he heard ravens, and soon felt his head become dizzy from the lack of air. Falling back against the bed with all the fight gone out of him, and soon he knew the life would be too, he heard the voice, and were he not already certain to die, then he'd have welcomed it if it had been offered. Jaehaerys Targaryen sends his regards. Sir Richard Lonmouth said just before Theobald breathed his last. Arianne. She had worried that their time in Sunspear was something she had built up. Had it been more in her mind than in reality? Had she allowed their time apart to cloud her judgment and make her think more fondly of it than it really was? As she breathlessly reached over for the glass of wine, she was more than happy to realize that the reality far exceeded what her mind had made up. Tyrion was insatiable, passionate, and most importantly giving. He sought to prolong her pleasure while he took his own, something that not everyone did. Since she'd arrived at the Rock, they'd spent as much time together as they could while still hiding, though which annoyed her, thankfully at night though they didn't hide. Either she came to him, or he to her, and they spent their time doing everything they could think of to each other. "My lion finally rests," she said, sipping her wine, the flush on her chest receding and her breath coming back to normal. "My princess has worn me out," he said, And she smiled. If she had then, so had he with her, she thought, as she took another sip. I am to speak to my cousin today, to meet with the dragons. Aye, John's been busy since you got here, Tyrion said, looking to the wine glass which she gave him while she poured herself another. With what? She asked curiously. Something you should speak to him about, or would you have me spill all his secrets? He japed, and she laughed. I think you spilled enough for one night, she said, looking down between her legs and hearing him choke a little on his wine. Do you wish me to come with you? He asked a little later as he was dressing. No. Perhaps it's for the best if I meet them alone. We'll speak later? She asked and hated the small note of desperation in her voice. Amongst other things, I hope, he said, kissing her. And she smirked as he left. She was glad now she'd taken her uncle's advice. Oberyn knew Tyrion, and she had seen it for herself the night she'd arrived. The way he'd looked over the men who were with her, how he'd studied them and seemed almost relieved that certain ones weren't there. How she felt about him confused her, worried her even. What if he felt different? What if she meant less to him than he to her? These were things she'd never dealt with before. She prided herself on being in control. She was the one who decided how her relationships did or did not develop. Yet with Tyrion, she felt a loss of control, an almost trepidation when she had met him again. Even planning for the visit to Casterly Rock had made her nervous in a way she never usually was. So she had resorted to what she knew, and she could see now that it would have been a terrible mistake. Princess, you sent for me? Her handmaiden asked as Arianne sat in front of the mirror a little while later. I did. Can you take this to Jon Snow? Give it to one of his guards. I believe they stay in the vaults, she said, handing her a note. I believe Jon Snow has left for the day, Princess. He and some others were planning a ride, though I may be able to catch him, the girl said, and she nodded before calling her back when she moved to the door. If you do, ask him, would it be acceptable for me to join them? She said, and the girl nodded. A few minutes later, she was surprised when Jon Snow himself knocked on her door. She'd seen the boy a couple of times, but apart from at the dock, it had only been briefly. He was a handsome young lad. His dark gray eyes looked almost black in the light, and his hair was tied up annoyingly. She found she wished to pull the tie from it, just to see how it looked. As he stood there smiling, she realized that she'd been staring at him for some time, and so she smiled back and invited him in. Princess Arianne, he said with a small bow. Jon Snow, or is it Jaehaerys Targaryen? She said with a smirk. I think for now Jon Snow will do, Princess. Your lady said you wish to come riding with us? He asked, and she nodded. We'll await you in the courtyard. I look forward to speaking to you later, but perhaps on this ride we could keep things more circumspect, he said. Of course. I heard you're an excellent horseman, Jon Snow. I look forward to seeing you in action, she said, and he smirked as he left. She was slightly disappointed to see so many people in the courtyard. Jon was talking and laughing with a little blonde girl, and she saw the Tyrell and the giant guard who followed Jon around, along with the blonde girl who squired for him. There were also some other younger boys and girls, numerous guards, and along with her own, she felt this would be a ride she'd not have fun on. She was soon proved very much mistaken. No sooner were they out of the rock's gates than the fun began. Firstly, the white wolf raced ahead, and she saw her guards look at it in awe, the wolf moving far faster than any horse could. Then the girl looked to Jon, and they moved forward. She turned to Tyene, who seemed eager for some reason, and so she asked what was going on. They're getting ready to race, Ari, her cousin said. Oh, a race. I'd like that, she said, and moved towards them before Tienye could say any more. To the stream, Jon. No backsies, the little blonde girl said. No backsies. Joy, ready, Jon said just as she arrived. Princess, we were just about to race, Jon said, and she caught the annoyed look the girl Joy was giving her. I know. I wish to join you. Myself and Tyene race all the time back in Dorne, she said with a smirk. This isn't Dorne, Princess, Joy said, and the girl's smirk was even bigger than her own. Very well. Up over the hill there you'll see a stream in the distance. Ghost is probably there already. We raced to there, Jon said, and she nodded. Ready, Joy, Princess, Laura's if you will. 1, 2, 3, go, Laura said, saying each of the numbers slowly and then shouting the order to race. She felt the wind in her hair and the horse under her tensed before it set off. Its speed was impressive, she felt, though compared to the two in front of her, not so much. From an early age, she and Tyene would race sand steeds through the desert, so she knew her way around a horse. Looking on as the two in front of her raced off, she felt like a novice, a first-time rider. They were dismounted and leading the horses to drink from the stream by the time she arrived, both of them laughing and joking, and she found it endearing. The way he acted with the young girl reminded her of Oberyn, of how he'd play with Elia or Obella, and the image made her smile. "Who won?" she asked as she dismounted and led her own horse to the stream. "A draw, I think. Was it a draw, Joy?" John asked. "No, I won. You cheated," Joy said, giggling. "There you have it, Princess. Apparently I cheated. We should have raced backsize," he said. And Joy laughed louder now as John moved in to tickle her. They ended up having a picnic by the stream, sitting under the shade of the tree. And while it was not dawn, she found the place peaceful. Placing the horses back in the stables when they got back, John said his farewells to Joy, and to who she learned were the girls who were fostering with her. Once they'd left, he walked over to her and whispered in her ear. "I believe it's time you met my sister," he said. "I'd like that very much." "Your guards, Princess, I need them to stay here. They won't be allowed in the vaults." She walked over and spoke to the guards, telling them to go back to their rooms and she'd be up later, and despite their reluctance, they agreed. Then walking with John, she found herself being led down into the vaults of Casterly Rock, her excitement building as she was about to meet a dragon. John led her out onto the beach, and she was surprised to see the white wolf there waiting for them. Looking to her cousin, she sought permission to touch the wolf. "Go ahead. Ghost won't bite, Princess," he said. And she rubbed her hand in the wolf's soft white fur. "Ghost, is that because he's so quiet?" she asked, and John nodded. "He's so soft," she said, and saw John smile. "He's a big furball, aren't you?" John said, and she swore the wolf shook his head. "When you see them, don't be scared. They'll not harm family." "You consider me family?" she asked, surprised, even though Oberyn had told her so. "Elia was my mother. Oberyn and your father my uncles, so cousin, I consider you family," he said, looking to her, and she saw the brief doubt in his eyes. "Then we are family, cousin," she said, happy to see him relax. The cave was dark until it was not, and she gasped at seeing them. The smaller one was a bright bronze, and though smaller than the white dragon, it wasn't small by any means. "This is my son, Ligeron," John said, and she looked at him as he nodded for her to touch the dragon. "Ligeron?" she asked, her breath hitching in her throat as she felt the warmth of the scales beneath her. "For the family, I lost my mother, father, and brother. This is Rhaenys, my sister," he said. And she found herself face to face with eyes of a color she remembered from a time long ago. Reaching out, she touched the dragon's face, feeling the vibrations as it trilled before looking behind her when John laughed as the dragon chirped. "She says you've grown up, cousin, and that so has she. So much so that you'll never be able to hold her in your arms like you once did," John said, as she felt the tears fall from her eyes. "Rhaenys," she said, leaning into the dragon's head, the eyes more familiar now. "Rhaenys," she said softly as the dragon chirped again. "Volantis 295, 296 AC. The Hound." Looking at the things crawling over her, listening to the noises they made, he could barely believe it. Dragons. Real-life dragons. She had walked into a fire and came out with dragons. He had been as terrified and scared as he had when Gregor had held him to the flames, and yet he had been ready to follow her into them. Had they not stopped him, then he would have. But she had come out the other side, and she had done what they had come here to do. Dany had woken dragons from stone. As Shiera covered her up, and the priests finally let him up from the ground, almost 10 of them it had taken to keep him there. He moved to her and looked her over to make sure she was unharmed, trying not to think of the irony of a woman walking into flames and coming out with barely a mark. Apart from her hair and her brows, though, Dany was not just unharmed, she was unburned too. "Are you well?" he asked worriedly. "I am. Look, Sandor, dragons," Dany said, smiling. "I can see that," he said, and he rubbed her head, making her laugh. Over the next few days, he watched as both she and Shiera attempted to get the dragons to eat, the little things turning their noses up at every attempt. Finally bored one day, he threw a piece of his own meat at them and they ate it ravenously, Dany running over and grabbing the rest of the meat from his plate. "What the fuck are you doing, you bald fucker?" he said angrily. "You can get more. They're hungry, you miserable fucker," she said, and she ignored Shiera's glare. The dragons ate the meat just as ravenously as they had the first piece, and it was then they knew they needed it cooked. However, when next they tried, it was the same as before, the dragons turning up their noses at the meat. "Maybe we need to cook it for them. Let them see the flames themselves," Dany said, and Shiera nodded. "How you gonna do that?" he asked and shivered involuntarily when Dany waked to the fire, the stick she took out flaming as Shiera held some meat to it. Once again they ate that day, but not the next, though this time they figured it out pretty quickly, with a piece of meat on a knife. Dany held it in front of the dragons, looking into their eyes. "Dracarys," she said, and the green one blew some smoke. The gold one too, but it was the black and red one who managed to produce flames. Each day they grew, and then the flames came from each of them. They were breaking their fast one morning when names were brought up. Try as he might, he couldn't help but take the piss out of Dany as she sat there bald, her forehead creased where her brows would be as she sat in deep thought. "You look fucking ridiculous," he said, smirking as he ate an egg from the plate. "What?" she said, turning to him. "This. It makes me want to just slap it over and over again," he said, rubbing her head. "Get off, you mad fucker," she said, giggling as he pulled her towards him. "Can't. Maybe it's lucky. If I rub it, maybe I'll have good luck," he chuckled. "Get away, Shiera. Make him stop," Dany said, and he stopped, turning to see where Shiera was, only to find she wasn't there. Turning back, he saw Dany standing in the corner laughing loudly. "Made you look, you silly fucker," she said, and he moved as if he was going to grab her, laughing as she squealed when she ran from the room. After sparring that day and then Dany taking her lesson with Shiera, the three of them sat while she fed the dragons. The green one had taken a shine to Shiera, the black and red to Dany, while the other alternated between the two and going after its brothers or sisters. He wasn't sure what they were, and neither was anyone else. "I've figured it out," Dany said, holding the black and the gold dragons in her hands. "I figured what out, Slappy?" he said, and she scowled at him before smirking. She hated the name, so every time he could, he said it, and he knew it annoyed her. "Their names. This one is Elegon," she said, pointing to the black one. "That one is Rhaegal," she said, pointing to the green, "and this is Sandorix," she said, looking to him. "Excellent choices. Dany, Rhaegal, what do you think?" Shiera said, and the green dragon chirped. He was staring at Dany, who was, in turn, staring at him. The first he figured was for her mother, and the second her brother. The third, he felt himself choke up and saw her smile. His own was on his face before he knew it, and so he nodded and got up from the chair, turning to leave the room. "Those are stupid fucking names, Slappy," he said as he walked away, and he heard the laughter as he left the room. Standing out on the balcony later that night, he heard the footsteps behind him, saw her hands as she leaned against the wall, her hood pulled up against the cold. "You shouldn't have named it after me, Dany," he said softly. "I didn't. I named it after a completely different Sandor, big tall fucker he was. Loved chicken. Always grumpy though, annoying fucker as well," she said as she giggled. "Thank you," he said almost under his breath. "Thank you, Sandor," she said, and as he felt her arms go around him, he hugged her, something he'd done very little, even with as close as they'd become. "Now fuck off to bed," he said a moment later, and she laughed as she walked away. "See you in the morning," she said. And he nodded. "Aye, see you in the morning, little sister," he whispered when she left, moving quickly to wipe the tear from his eye. He was amazed by how quickly they grew over the next few weeks. In days they were as big as small birds, and now as big as some of the large eagles they'd seen as they'd traveled here. Their flames seemed to get bigger as they grew, not to mention their personalities began to come more to the fore. Elegon was quiet and reserved until she wasn't, or he wasn't. He still wasn't sure what the dragon was. Rhaegal was happy and playful, while Sandorix was the grumpy one, easy to annoy and keen to bite if you did so. Dany would spend hours talking to them, Shiera too, and the dragons would chirp their annoyance if left alone for too long. They had decided to wait until they could fly and feed themselves before leaving, the idea of them being in cages or having to carry them around just too hard to contemplate. "Sandor, we must talk," Shiera said, coming to his room one night. "What's wrong?" he asked. A boy came looking for Dany today with some men. I followed him to a small ship, but he saw me. He thought I was her," she said. And he laughed. Never mind the age difference alone. The image of both women was vastly different. Dany's hair was just starting to grow back, little more than fuzz on the top of her head, while Shiera's was longer than Dany's had been when he first met her. What she told him next, though, had him wary. Kinvara called him a false dragon and told him to leave. "I'm worried, Sandor. I saw it in a dream once, a cloth dragon swaying on a pole amidst a cheering crowd," Shiera said. "Where's this boat?" "Down by the river, close to the crab stall. The boy has dyed blue hair. He's with a man who wears his hair pulled back in long robes and another orange-haired man with a beard," she said. "I'll go take a look. You and Dany talk to Kinvara. Find out what she knows," he said, grabbing his sword. "Sandor, be careful," Shiera said, kissing his unburnt cheek. I will. Should anything happen," he said. And she nodded. He found the ship easy enough. The shy maid was nothing special, and as he sat looking at it, he thought about just going on board and killing all who were on it. If these were more of the fat magister's men, then they deserved it, did they not? As he was debating whether or not to do just that, he saw two women come on deck, one a dark-skinned older woman and the other younger, though not by much. The presence of the women gave him pause. Men he had no problem killing, but women he'd not if it could be helped. He saw the boy come to the deck, his hair now more silver than blue, and then he saw a ghost from the past, which made him wonder. Lonmouth had sent him here to find Dany, to protect her, and he'd not known who it was he served. As he looked at John Connington, he thought that perhaps he was closer to finding out. Smirking, he turned back and headed towards the Red Temple. Casterly Rock, 296 AC. Jaime. Seeing John climb on a dragon's back was both exhilarating and awe-inspiring, and yet for Jaime, it was the fear he felt. In the air he couldn't protect him, but if he fell, what was he to do? What could he do? Despite John's reassurances, Dacey's and even Jenna's, much to his surprise, he stood and looked on nervously as Rhaenys took to the sky. They saw very little of the flight itself. The night was dark, and the moon, though illuminating, didn't show enough. When the dragon landed, though, Jaime felt a sense of relief, as he did each time John flew on it again. For others, it was the majesty of seeing a dragon with a man on its back. For Jaime, it was watching the boy he most cared for and ensuring he was safe. While Arthur would smile fondly and think of Rhaegar or Walder of his grandmother, Jaime thought of John, only of John. As the time came to deal with the maesters, his worries were of a different sort. The princess arrived, and she and Tyrion seemed very friendly. Dacey and Joanna were healthy and well, and yet Jaime was pacing like a madman as he waited outside the cave. "We should be in there," he said to Arthur. "All is well, Jaime," Arthur said. "How do we know? He could be hurt. He could need us," he said agitatedly. "He'll call if he does. We must have faith, brother," Arthur said, placing his hand on his shoulder. Time seemed to stretch out forever. How long they actually waited for, he didn't know. But when John came from the cave, it didn't matter. Seeing the blood had them all running. Arthur, Loris, Joris, Brienne, none of them moving as fast as he. When he reached him, he saw, though, that John was smiling. He seemed unharmed, and yet the blood was everywhere. "What happened, John? The blood, what happened?" he asked. It's nothing. The magic. It's not my blood," John said. He was confused. "I don't, John. I don't. Come, we'll talk more inside. There's something I need to do." "I'm fine, Jamie, truly," John said, and he nodded. Once he told everyone else he was fine, he, Arthur, and John walked to his room. John talking off his shirt once he got there. He looked, and he knew that Arthur did too. Both of them then, looking to each other, relieved that there were no wounds on their king. The blood. It's the cost of using so much magic, so much power. But it's not like a wound, not truly, John said, and he shook his head. "I know it's hard to explain, and I'm not even certain how I know it, but I do. It's useful, though," John said as he took out the glass candles. Placing them on the table, John held the shirt in his hand and wrapped it around the green one, calling them close. He told them to watch. Jamie was amazed by what he saw. The Reach, Riverlands, Vale, North, and King's Landing, Sunspear, and Old Town. One after the other he saw them, drowned, stabbed, arrows, poison, all of them dead, 14 men in total, Pycelle and Theobald included. "All of them?" Arthur asked. "Aye," John said. "So, public, John?" he asked, and John nodded. "There was no other way. The realm will talk. But we have proof of some of their misdeeds. Richard can make it known if need be, but who are they going to blame? Who are they going to suspect?" "He's right, Jamie. He doesn't exist. Let them talk. Let them search. They'll not find anything to lead them to John." "Is that not right?" Arthur said, and John nodded. "Not me. Not Richard. Not anyone. The only person who'd have suspected more would be Marwyn, and he's with us," John said, and Arthur smiled. "Arthur, can you give me a moment?" He sat on the seat and waited until Arthur left the room before John walked over to him and put his hand on his shoulder. "I am well, truly, this Renix. I know it's worrying. I worry too. But up there on her back, Jamie, it's like being on winter. I know you said it wasn't, but it is. This magic, it's like practicing with a sword. It's dangerous. I know that, but the more I do it, the better and easier it is." I know. I'll not take any unnecessary risks, and we'll not have to do anything like tonight again for a long time. Perhaps we'll never need to," John said, and he nodded, glad to see his concern wasn't unappreciated, and that it was shared. The reports came in over the next few days, the ravens arriving with tales of missing maesters and bodies being found. When the note arrived from Richard, though, he breathed even easier. No one suspected any conspiracy. The deaths were being accepted as coincidences, and he wondered if truly the gods were on their side. Something that Daisy seemed to believe when she saw John flying on Renix's back. Only the gods could bless someone so, she said, smiling. "Which gods?" he said with a chuckle. "John believes in the same ones as I do, so my gods, not your soft southern gods." She said, her eyebrow raised. "Ah, the heathen tree gods. Well, once I know," he said. And she laughed. "Is it true he's taking Arthur up soon?" she asked, and he looked at her, wondering where she'd heard it. "Walter told me," she said a moment later. "Aye, it's true. He also says Tyrion will be flying soon as well." "You're worried about him?" "I'm worried about both of them. John may think he's unable to be hurt, but we know better. And Tyrion, I worry. Come, let's go put Joanna to bed. Then maybe we can start working on a little brother or sister for her," Daisy said. And he looked at her and saw her nod. Since Joanna was born, she'd been taking moon tea. Neither of them was truly ready for another babe, and they weren't really sure how they'd manage one. Over time, though, it became easier. That Joanna was the quietest babe you could ever hope for helped also. They had talked about another, never seriously, but they had spoken of it, and he smiled as he walked back with her. Apparently, a decision had been made. Citadel 296 AC Sam. He had known, deep down inside, he had known this was the plan. Why it was the plan, or what they hoped to gain from it, he didn't know. But he knew that Theobald was to die, and that he'd play a role. He didn't know that Walgrave was to die also, though when they examined the man and he heard the witnesses speak, Sam breathed a huge sigh of relief. An accident. It was simply an accident. He'd continued to believe that until the rest of the news came in, had he heard nothing else, then he'd have been certain it was an accident only. But when Valen and Gallard never returned, when their bodies were found with their throats slit, he began to grow concerned. When news came of others too, he grew even more concerned. What had happened? Maesters disappeared, bodies were found. The Grand Maester was dead, and Sam felt like he had played a role in something terrible. He tried to think, to figure it out, and he came back to the Ravens, to the witnesses of the death of Maester Walgrave. Making his way to the hall to break his fast, he saw Pate sitting with Molander and Armin and made his way over to him. "I'd say it'll be Gorman," Armin said. "Not Eric?" Pate asked. "What about Turkin?" Molander said. "Sam, you're closest to bros. Who's it going to be?" Pate asked. "Who's what going to be?" He said cluelessly. "The new Grand Maester. Who is it going to be?" Armin asked. "Oh, Gorman," he said. And Armin nodded, a smirk on his face. "Pate, what did you see when Mr. Walgrave died?" Sam asked. "Oh, gods, not this story again," Molander said, getting up from the seat and walking away. "I like this story," Armin said. Pate proceeded to tell them of walking through the corridors and seeing the maester at the top of the stairs, seeing as the birds flew towards him, and then as he fell a few moments later. He told them how he'd run to Ebros's room, and when they returned, Maester Walgrave had already passed. Sam listened eagerly, the birds interesting even more now, and he began to wonder, could he be right? Jon Snow had asked for a favor, and then the man had come, the letter being delivered to Valen and Gallard before allowing him into the Citadel. Then he'd pointed out Theobald to him, and the Ravens attacked Walgrave. He knew the Starks were warbs, and that Jon had his wolf first given its size. Was he a warb too? Was he involved in the deaths? Why? What would a bastard from the north want with dead maesters? It didn't make any sense to him, and he knew no one would believe him anyway. The maesters convincing themselves that despite all the evidence, these were just coincidences. But for Sam it made no sense, all these men dying, disappearing, all at the same time, and right at the heart of it were Jon Snow and Marwyn. As he slept that night he began to worry. Did he know too much? What did he really know? And one thought which he couldn't escape from. How do you hide from someone who can be in any animal they wish? Casterly Rock 296 AC, Jon. Knowing it was done made him relax somewhat, allowed him to concentrate on the other things he knew he needed to do. He spent time with Joy, with his friends, and almost every night he and Rhaenys took to the skies. When Jaime raised his concerns, Jon did his best to alleviate them. He told him that being on Rhaenys was the same as winter. That was far from the truth. Being on Rhaenys was nothing like being on winter. Riding a dragon was vastly different than riding a horse. Even his connection to winter paled in comparison. When they'd take to the sky, he felt like this was where he belonged. This was where he was supposed to be, and Rhaenys agreed. What started out as simple flights became more and more, longer, more adventurous, full of more dangerous maneuvers. Together they tested the limits of each other, and he found there weren't any. Rhaenys said they were bonded. They were one. And up in the air he felt it more keenly than anywhere else. When he took Sorella up with him, she was amazed, laughing behind him as they flew out to sea. I've never thank you, cousin, thank you both," Sorella said, hugging him and then patting Rhaenys when they landed. Knowing he was able to carry someone easily meant the time was growing closer, and both he and Rhaenys were excited by the possibilities. His sister longed to fly the skies properly, to go to the places they had both traveled in their visions. First, though, he needed to take Arthur up, and so he arranged it for later that night. The famed knight looking for the first time to John's mind, nervous, though he showed no fear when the time came. "Hold on tight, Arthur," he said before leaning forward. "Sovigan Renix," he said, and they took off, Arthur's arms wrapped tightly around his waist. He soon noticed the difference. Sorella was small and slight, Arthur anything but. He felt the weight as they flew, and it forced him to readjust several times in the air. Renix, though, sensed it. She knew when to slow or quicken, and almost without any direction from him, verbally at least, she did so. Soon he felt more comfortable, and they began to do some of the things they usually did when flying together, more to get Arthur used to them than anything else. Arthur seemed more than happy to land, and as he got reacquainted with the ground, John walked to Renix and looked into her eyes, the smile large on his face. "Are you tired?" he asked. No more than with you. His weight doesn't bother me, little brother." "I think I could carry more people easily," she said, chirping back, and he was glad he was the only one who could hear it. "One is enough," he said, stroking her close to her eyes, a small spot near the tip of her snout being her favorite. "When?" she asked. "Within the week, Ray. We'll let Arthur get more used to things, and then we'll fly." "Where?" she asked excitedly. "High Heart. I think we need to go there first, then to Summerhall." "As you say, little brother," she said as she went inside the cave. He walked over to Arthur, who seemed far more comfortable now, being on the ground, definitely agreeing with him more. "Well?" he asked with a smirk. That was different," Arthur said. "Good. We'll fly again tomorrow," he said, and saw the knight roll his eyes. "As you command, my king," Arthur said, and he chuckled. "We need to be ready, Arthur. We've many places to visit," he said, and Arthur nodded. He asked Loris to come see him later that night and told him that he'd take him up on the morrow, his friend excited by the prospect, not so much by what he told him next, though. "I'm going to be gone for a moon or so, Loris. I need to. Rainey's needs we have to see," he said. And Loris looked at him and nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, John." "I will. Besides, Arthur will be with me and will be in the air for most of it," he said. And Loris smiled, though there was no humor in it. "I need you to look after Ghost for me, Loris. He'll spend most of his time with the others, with Joy and Kragan, but he'll come to your room. Can you watch him for me?" "Of course, John. You don't need to ask," Loris said. He spent more time with Joy and was glad when Kragan, Ashara, and Garion arrived back from Castamere. Joy hadn't been ready to travel with them once they'd returned from Highgarden. The girl missed the Rock, her friends, and Balerion. So when they left, she stayed, and he was only too happy for the chance to be with her, knowing he'd be leaving soon. "I need to go away for a little while, Joy. I need to fly," he said to her softly as they sat in her room. "Can I come?" she asked excitedly. "Not this time, but soon, Joy. Soon I'll take you up with me," he said, smiling. "Promise?" she said, making sure he wasn't jesting. "I promise, princess," he said, kissing her forehead. Speaking to Jirian, he could see how happy he was. He and Ashara were together for true now, and he wondered if there would be a wedding in the future. Ashara, too, seemed far happier, and John felt his heart swell for her. She had loved once and lost, and he was happy she'd found it again, knowing how difficult it must have been for her. He spent the night before they left writing out letters, one for Richard and one for Marjorie. He went over plans with Jamie and spoke to Arianne before inviting Tyrion to the caves to speak to him. The two of them walked slowly across the sand, and he could feel Tyrion's desire to both be here and be elsewhere, the two sides of his heart calling out to him. "You love her, don't you?" he said, and saw Tyrion look to him. The smile and small nod he gave him enough for now. "I wish you nothing but the best, uncle, you know that right." "I know, John. I, Tyrion stuttered. "Tell her, uncle. Tell her it all." He set his hand on his shoulder. "What if she won't? But I know how hard it is to keep things from someone you care about, someone you love. It eats you up inside, uncle, tears away at you, And this is not something you can hide. It's almost time, he said as they reached the cave. I can feel him, John, in my head. When I close my eyes, he wishes for it so badly. To fly with me, Tyrion said, his excitement clear. I know, Uncle. When I get back, we can practice. And then you can take Lygaron up yourself. Both of them stood in the cave, and for anyone outside looking in, the only differences they'd see was size. How they stood with the dragons, leaned into them, the expression on their faces. While they shared no physical features, right now, at this time and in this place, it was clear they were kin. The first, and soon to be the second Dragon Lord in over 100 years. The next day, he sparred with his friends and spoke to Walder and Jors. He went and visited Daisy and Joanna, even holding the little girl who was growing so fast. He took Joy for a ride, just the two of them, racing and playing in the stream before heading back to the rock. Dinner that night had him sit and tell stories to Joy and her friends, speak to Genna and Geryon, and to Ashara and Kragan. He knew he was fitting in a moon of activities into one night, trying to give everyone some of his time. With Tyrion, they spoke only briefly. They'd said what was needed the night before, which of course left only Jaime, and he put that off as long as he could. Standing at the edge of the vaults, his pack ready, the food in a sack, he waited until he heard him behind him. It's time, Jaime said. He nodded. It is, he said softly. He said softly, I wish I was going with you, Jaime said, and he smiled.
Why?
I need you here. They need you here. Be safe, my king. Take no risks and hurry home, Jaime said. And John found he had no words, couldn't even begin to explain what it was he was feeling. Turning, he embraced his mentor, his hand, the man who had done so much for him. He'd be gone just a moon or so, and yet it felt far harder than any other time he'd left. As he and Arthur climbed onto Rhaenix's back, he looked back to see Jaime standing on the beach watching them, and as they took to the air, he knew. This was the first time he and Jaime had parted. The longest time he'd be away from the man he knew now was the father he chose. I'll be back soon, Father, he whispered so softly that it was lost in the breeze. King's Landing 296 AC. John Aaron. He laughed as he read the note. The first piece of good news he'd read in moons, and he found he enjoyed it immensely. Pouring himself a glass of wine, he sent the man back to Illyrio's manse, the magister having purchased a large property for when he was in the capital. He had needed this, given the other news that he had gotten, a Tyrell of all things. They were sending them a damn Tyrell. When they had found the old fool dead, he had been glad of it, happy that he was no longer to suffer the man's mummery. They had buried the body and done so with all the respect the office, if not the man himself, deserved, and he had thought no more of it. The acolytes had taken over the ravens, and they'd sent for the replacement. He'd even sent a raven asking Colman to come, which was when things took a strange turn. Lord Hand, some ravens for you, the young man said, and he opened them, shocked at their contents. My love, I find your request most strange. Maester Coleman left almost a moon ago to join you in King's Landing at your request. I'd have thought he'd arrived by now, Lysa. He shook his head before opening the next scroll. Lord Hand, I write to inform you that we have discovered the bodies of Maesters Arden and Cates on the Rose Road, both men seeming to have been attacked by bandits. I've ordered my own men to scour the surrounding lands, and you can be ensured that I'll see the men brought to justice. Randley Tarley, Lord of Hornhill. On and on the ravens had come, Maesters' bodies found, Maesters disappeared, of Coleman. There was no sign, and the Waynwood's Maester had also been found dead, though this one made sense to him at least. Whatever possessed the man to ride alone through the mountains was beyond him. He asked Lomas to look into it, the new master of Whisperers being far more competent than Rosby was, and thankfully someone who didn't cough all the time either. While he had wanted Lomas's brother Sir Aemon, even the man being kin to Robert didn't forgive him being named after a dragon spawn. So he had settled for his brother, and surprising found Sir Lomas Estermount to be most competent. Not that he knew anything of what had gone on here with the Maesters, the Citadel itself seeming to think it coincidental rather than anything suspicious. So he had left it at that, asked Sir Lomas to keep looking into it and to bring anything he found to him, and then thought no more of it, until he had received the raven telling him he was getting a damn Tyrell as Pycelle's replacement. Has Lord Baelish arrived back yet? He asked his steward, only to find he had not. No, my lord. Very well, when he does inform him that I wish to speak to him, he said, and the steward nodded. It was after his meal that night that Peter arrived. Where he'd been he didn't know, but knowing his friend he'd have wagered he was working on something. When he came in and sat down, he handed him the note, waiting until he read it to speak. Once he had, and John saw a smile appear on his face, he reached over and poured them both a glass of wine. This is excellent news, my lord. Finally seeing the lions put in their place, Peter said. Indeed, Illyrio has come through once again. Hopefully, he can keep them even more occupied. I'd like to see them hurt, he said, smirking. Hey, well, this is a start, is it not? Though you still seem troubled, my lord? Aye. Those fools at the Citadel are sending us a bloody Tyrell, he said angrily. The new Grand Maester? Peter asked. Aye. Those grasping roses will have their man here. We need to limit him, Peter. See that our own people are around him. Of course, my lord, though we could use this also, Peter said with a smirk. Oh, let Olenna know that it was our influence that saw it done, he said, and John shook his head. She'll not buy that. How fares your talks with them? He asked. Not good, my lord. After what the prince did in Highgarden, what he said, I doubt even with Stannis' help we'll be able to rehabilitate his image. Peter said. We must. Skipping a crown prince is a tricky subject, Peter. It sets a precedent and can cause issue. Joffrey would have no support, my lord. Perhaps it's time we started to look into raise Prince Tommen's profile, he asked. Perhaps. Or maybe we can raise Joffrey's, give him some time on Dragonstone before we bring him back and hope the stink has gone off him. If so, we can then present him in a new light? As you say, my lord, Peter said, taking a sip of the wine. I need you to go to the Vala Petir. I wish I could go myself, but I'm needed here, as are you, of course, he said, nodding to his friend. But with Coleman's disappearance, Jaspar's death, there is work to be done. Lysa could do with your help also, and she'll be happy to see you, no doubt. Very well, my lord, I'll finish up my duties here and leave the day after next, if that's acceptable. It is, Petir. Thank you. My lord, Petir said as he rose and bowed his head a little. He was more than happy with that, having no wish to go back to the Vale and deal with his wife's nagging. Just reading the Raven's scroll had put the woman's voice in his head. As he went to bed, he found himself looking forward to Illyrio's next visit. The man had come through again. The lions would bleed and he deserved a reward, John felt. Volantis, 296 AC, Jenny. She listened as Shiera. Sandor and Kinvara spoke of the boy who'd come to find her. For the briefest moment she felt excited. Her nephew had found her and she'd get to meet him. Soon, though, it was clear that this boy was not her nephew. A mummer's dragon, Shiera called him. A false one, Kinvara said. Sandor, though, explained more of how he had come to be in her service. Rhaegar's former squire had paid him to find her, one of her brother's closest friends, and she felt her heart stir at that her brother had gained such loyalty that this man was trying to help her, made her miss not knowing him all the more. When Kinvara said it was at her nephew's behest, she felt it even more. Yet she, Shiera, and Sandor were all left frustrated when the priestess would tell them nothing more about her nephew. Should you know of him too soon, then you risk us all, not just his life or your own, but everyone's, Kinvara said. How does me knowing where he is, me going to him, how does that risk everyone? She asked with a sigh. Your path is not to cross with his, not yet, princess. That is all I can tell you. I've seen you stand beside your nephew, seen the dragons fly together, but not yet. You said John Connington was with this boy. Was he not my brother's friend also? She asked, and Sandor nodded. I believe so. He was hand to your father for some time, until he lost the Battle of the Bells. Why he's with this boy if he's not your kin, I don't know, Sandor said. And you're sure he's not my kin? she asked Kinvara. He's a false dragon, princess. Of that I'm certain. Kinvara said, I need to meet him. Judge for myself, she said, and Kinvara shook her head. That would be a bad idea. Trust me on this, princess. That way only leads to pain and heartache. How can you know this? She asked, her frustration with the woman clear. I just know. Some things we are shown in the flames, but not all. I know if you and this false dragon meet, that it will end in tears and blood, Kinvara said, shaking her head. We can meet him here. Have some of your warriors close by, and Sandor and I will be armed. If he is a false dragon, then we need to know what he's up to, what his plans are. She said, and Shiera nodded. Sandor shook his head, but when she looked at him, he nodded too. I am at your service, princess. I can only give you the warning. What you do with it is up to you, Kinvara said and stood up. If it's your wish, I'll send an acolyte to bring them here. It is, she said, and Kinvara walked from the room. The meeting was set up for the next day, and she felt eager to find out what she could, to help her nephew if she could. Whatever the truth of this mummer's dragon was, she would get to the bottom of it, and if need be, she'd see his plot ended when she did. They broke their fast the next morning. She played with the dragons, Elegon and Rhaegal both eager to play, and Sandorix just sitting in the corner looking bored. She and Sandor sparred, and he asked her if she was sure about the meeting, and she said she was. When it came time to get ready, she was surprised that Shiera didn't wear a disguise, her aunt instead telling her that the boy had already seen her, and so it would be pointless. Making her way to the room they were to meet in, she felt her nerves at her. She knew this boy wasn't her nephew, and yet a part of her hoped they were all wrong. No wood? Sandor asked, and she chuckled. You don't like my hair, she said, rubbing her hand through the small amount of fuzz on her head. What fucking hair? She didn't have time to laugh, as they were brought into the room by some of the red priests just as Sandor finished speaking. The boy was tall and slim, handsome even, though the blue dye in his hair hadn't fully washed out. Still, she smiled to see the silver beneath it. Though he wasn't even looking at her, which she found strange, the man with him also had blue hair. John Connington, her father's former hand and her brother's friend. The other man was orange-haired, a guard of some sort, she imagined. Aunt Daenerys, long have I wished to meet you, the boy said, but not to her. Instead it was to Shiera he was looking, and she glanced at her aunt and nodded. You call me aunt, yet who are you? My nephew is long dead, and you would dare try to pass yourself off as him. Have you no shame, no compassion? Shiera said, her voice sounding as if she was full of hurt. Aunt Daenerys, please, you've been misinformed. My name is Aegon Targaryen. I am your brother's son, the boy said, looking to John Connington for help. It's true, princess. My name is John Connington. I was hand to your father and best friend to your brother. I, too, thought that all was lost, only to find out the truth, the man said. Ugh! The truth? What truth? Shiera asked. Princess Elia feared what would happen, princess. She arranged with Lord Varys to smuggle Aegon from the Red Keep and to be brought to safety. I was contacted to help protect and to teach him for his future role. Which is? Shiera asked. To regain my rightful throne, aunt, to restore our family to where we belong. Together you and I can bring our house the justice it deserves, Aegon said, and she had to admit the idea sounded good. We will speak after we eat, nephew. These priests will see to your rooms, and we can talk later. Shiera said, I look forward to it, aunt, Aegon said, smiling. They waited until they had left, and before she or Shiera had a chance to say anything, Sandor did first in his own inimitable style. That boy is a fucking idiot, he said, and she looked to him and then her aunt, seeing the smile on Shiera's face. Why? She asked. If he thinks she is you, then he's a fucking idiot, he said, pointing at Shiera and then her. Don't get me wrong, you look good for your age, but you don't look like a 2-10 name-day-old girl. Sandor has the right of it, Danny. How he could think it is beyond me. Shiera said. We can use it, though. Play out the mummery. You be me and Sandor be himself, and I can be a slave, a servant. We'll find out more about him that way. I don't know. I think we should leave. I didn't like how Connington looked at you, Sandor said to Shiera. We came this far, Sandor. They're here. We either take the chance to find out who they are, or we run, Danny. Shiera asked. We stay, she said, and Shiera nodded, while Sandor did so more reluctantly. Dinner that night was odd. It was hard for her to pretend to be a slave, and given how her so-called nephew behaved towards her, it was clear he saw her as such. He was dismissive, arrogant, and he talked far too much like Viserys for her liking. The way he looked at Shiera too disturbed her. She had seen that look on men's faces before. Some when they looked at her. The boy lusted after her aunt, after who he thought was her. Over the next couple of days, she found out even more so that this was the case, this and that. John Connington didn't approve for some reason, Sandor keeping so close to her aunt seeming to annoy the man. At first, she had put it down to the fact that Aegon wasn't allowed to be alone with her aunt more and more, though she was starting to think that wasn't the truth at all. You girl, how long have you been with my aunt? Aegon said to her one morning when he was sparring against the orange-haired man, Danny ignoring him as she walked away. I spoke to you, girl, Aegon said angrily. Danny kept walking and felt his hand grab her from behind, his fingers digging into her skin. The knife was inside her dress and she could grab it easily, but she played along. Forgive me, master, I did not hear, she said, and he sneered at her contemptuously. You're lucky you are not mine. Answer the question, he said. Almost a year, master. She saved me from my last master. He was a cruel man, she said softly. Did you hear that, duck? My aunt saved her, he said, and she felt her anger threaten to boil over, the look on his face and the way he spoke to her, annoying her immensely. She moved to walk away and he grabbed her again, looking at her before smirking when he let her go, and she rushed off towards where Sandor and Shiera would be. Women, they're too soft, duck, she heard him say as she left, and she laughed at it. If he touched her like that again, then she'd show him how hard a woman could be. She found John Connington sneaking around their rooms, saw him trying doors, and when she spoke to the others that night, she had to tell Sandor to let it go. Her loyal protector threatening to gut the boy and his fucking friends. Over the next week they found out little. Aegon became louder and more annoying, and it was beginning to be clear they were wasting their time. They thought nothing of it when the orange-haired man Duck started going back and forth to the boat. Glad as if anything it gave them one less to watch, and while John Connington had stopped trying to get into their rooms, he had started to look at her way too much, his gaze causing her some concern. Why and how things came to a head, she wasn't sure. Aegon had been annoying as always and had tried to touch her aunt, though she wasn't sure it was that alone. Only that she'd had enough and called for them to join her. You called for me, aunt, Aegon said to Shiera, John Connington standing beside him. You really are a fool, Danny said, and he glared at her angrily. Aunt, I know this girl is your servant, but I'll not be spoken to by a slave this way, he said, moving forward only for Sandor to do likewise. A foolish boy. What's your excuse, Lord Connington? A boy may not know better, but someone who claims to have been my brother's best friend should, or are you to as blind as this false dragon here? She said and saw the confused look. Aegon shot John Connington. No, I'm well aware of your games, princess. I was wondering when you'd show yourself for who you are, and why you'd play them when we came to you as friends. John Connington said. John? Aegon said, his voice shaky. That's right, Aegon. If that's even your true name. Mine, however, is true. I am Princess Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, and you, boy, are no nephew of mine, she said and saw the angry look he gave her, smiling at him and shaking her head. A false dragon, a mummer's dragon, and this is who you serve. John, this is how you honor Rhaegar. Shiera said, I am true. I'm a dragon. The last dragon, Aegon said, spittle coming from his mouth. You are no dragon, and you are no longer welcome here. Be gone, and be glad I let you walk from here with your lives. When next we meet, you'll not be so lucky," she said as she moved away. The sound of the slap was heard around the room, as was the spears the fiery hand pointed at the man and boy. She turned back around to see Sandor standing in front of her and Aegon laying on the floor, blood coming from his lip where he'd been hit. John Connington looked at them with fury in his eyes, but he was outnumbered, outmatched, and so he helped Aegon up and practically dragged him from the room. "Was that too much?" she asked, and saw Sandor smirk and Shiera's little nod, though her aunt seemed somewhat concerned also. Kinvara arrived a few minutes later, and she watched as she used a cloth to wipe the blood that had fallen on the floor. No more than a few drops, but enough it seemed for what she wanted to show them, and she bid them follow. Standing in front of the brazier, she held the cloth in her hand and turned to them before she spoke. "There is power in King's blood," she said as she dropped the cloth into the flames. Nothing happened. The cloth just burned normally, no extra flames or light, and Dany nodded as she welcomed the proof. She felt it then, the anger, the sorrow, the call, and she ran from the room, Sandor and Shiera running after her, down the corridors and out into the courtyard, and when she got there she knew why Duck had gone back to the ship, and she felt such a fool. Dany, what is it?" Shiera asked as Rhaegal and Elegon flew towards them. "Sandorix. They've taken Sandorix. They've stolen my son," she said as the tears fell from her eyes. Sansa. She and her good sister, which was what she had come to think of Marjorie, as were finishing their lesson before getting ready for the day ahead, and Sansa found herself looking forward to it. Every time she looked to Marjorie, she found herself imagining what the wedding was like, what the sky looked like that night, and how Marjorie must have felt kneeling in front of the three singers. She and Fang had gone to sit by the trees more than once, just closing her eyes and picturing what it would have been like, while a part of her was annoyed at them both for not inviting her. A different part, the part which believed in knights, maidens, and chivalric tales, found it to be something special. Good Queen Alysanne and King Jaehaerys, married in secret and ready to take their rightful place on the throne, soon to usher in a period of peace and harmony. She knew Jon would make a great king, Marjorie a great queen, her best friend, and her brother. She swooned and was caught once again. "Sansa, are you even listening?" Marjorie said, and she turned and looked at her friend in embarrassment. "What?" she asked, and tried not to giggle at Marjorie's put-out look. "I said we have arrangements to make Garland and Lyanette the wedding, remember? That's moons away. I'd rather talk about another wedding," she said, looking to Marjorie and seeing her shake her head. She was surprised to see Marjorie hand in her writing to Maester Lomis, even more so when her friend walked from the room. Handing in her own, she hurried after her, finding her sitting on the window seat that overlooked the garden below. She took a seat beside her and said nothing, just waiting to see if Marjorie would speak, something she did not do for quite some time. She took a seat beside her and said nothing. "Marge?" she asked softly after a little while. What? Oh, it's nothing," Marjorie said, and she wanted to push. More than anything, she wanted to ask her what it was that was upsetting her, but she instead just sat in silence until it was time for lunch. Marjorie seemed more like herself during lunch, happier, and they along with Eleanor and Mira gossiped about nights and balls, about the wedding and Sansa's upcoming name day, and who may or may not come to both. She expected Marjorie to get upset when Loras and Jon's names were brought up, Eleanor being sure they'd both come for the wedding, and Mira even suggesting they could come for Sansa's name day also. Marjorie, though, just smiled and suggested that they'd come if they could, and Sansa was sure she was holding things in, that she was trying not to build her hopes up. This became even more clear to her later on, when Marjorie begged off from going to the gardens. Eleanor and Mira then deciding to go into the town, leaving Sansa with nothing to do for the rest of the day. "You look bored," she heard Willa say as he walked up to her as she was sitting on the grass, Fang running through the open spaces ahead of her. "I am. I had not expected to see you today," she said as she looked up at him. "I'm bored also. Join me?" he said, holding out his hand, which she took. Despite the wedding being a couple of moons away, Lord Mace and Lady Allery were keen to do it right, So between the plans they made and the visits to Lady Leonette's family, it had left Willis with even more to do than usual. While they still took their walks together, they'd been less frequent, and she'd found herself missing them terribly. As they walked to the bench where they would usually sit, though, she soon found her boredom a thing of the past. "Where is my sister today?" Willis asked when they sat. "She's a little, she's not, Sansa." "I know about her and John, the wedding," he said, and she breathed a sigh of relief. "I think she misses him even more now," she said, and he nodded. "I think you're right. And you?" "Me?" she asked, surprised. "How do you feel about the fact your brother and my sister are married?" Willis asked with a small smirk on his face. I wish I could have been there, that we all could. Gods, why didn't they just tell us?" She said, her voice full of frustration, and as she heard Willis chuckle, she frowned at him before she too began to laugh. "Because then they'd not have been able to," she said a moment later. "Aye, they're good together. They will be good together," Willis said, and she nodded. "Can we go hawking again?" she asked, biting her lip. "I promise not to cheat this time," she said when he took some time to answer. "You cheated?" "Really, Sansa, what were you thinking?" he said, and she looked to the ground before she realized he was jesting. "You're so mean," she said, slapping his shoulder, though not very hard. I'd like to go again." "Tomorrow?" he asked, and she nodded. She was surprised by how long he stayed with her, both of them sitting and talking about various things and just enjoying each other's company. He asked her more about her warging, and she told him what John had said about the birds, while also at the same time showing him just how easy it had become for her. They talked about Garland and Leonette's wedding, and she found herself pleased by just how happy he was for his brother, how proud of him he was. When they were walking back, she laughed when Fang walked between them, the wolf allowing Willis to pet her head repeatedly, and even looking up to him every so often in order for him to do it more. While Fang was friendly with all the Tyrells, even with Olenna, who seemed almost fearful of the wolf at times, she was especially so with Willis and Marjorie, something Sansa wondered about. "Well, my lady, it seems I must bid you farewell, I'd say, until the morrow, but no doubt we'll see each other tonight at dinner," Willis said, and she giggled when he bowed and kissed her hand. "Why, thank you, kind sir. I shall look forward to our future adventures together," she said with a curtsy, giggling some more at the laugh that came from Willis when she did so. "Now I really should run. No doubt my grandmother will be most displeased I've not been working today," he said, and she was about to say how sorry she was for distracting him when he rolled his eyes, making her laugh fully this time. She watched him walk away, the cane hitting the ground with each step, and she found herself hating the thing. Some people looked down on Willis, she knew. She heard something Randall Tarley had said during the tourney, and had she been closer, she'd have given him a piece of her mind. But he had left before she was able to. They thought him lesser because of his injured leg, and in doing so they missed what made him so very special. His mind was as big as his heart, Sansa thought, and he was far better than most of the men she'd met since she came to Highgarden. As she made her way to her room, she found herself thinking on the wedding once again. She looked forward to it, and to the one that John and Marjorie would no doubt have in the future. Quickly finding herself thinking of dresses, balls, and feasts, and of how the brides would look. Opening her door, though she found herself thinking on Willis and cursing the cane once more. Were it not for that, then he'd be able to dance at those weddings, and she'd then be able to dance with the man she wished to. Casterly Rock, 296 AC, Jenna. She had been called to speak to her nephews and brothers, a full family meeting, and she found herself excited by it. It was rare they all sat down and spoke together. They had meals where they all ate together, and each of them met regularly, but an actual sit-down meeting was a rarity. As she walked to Jamie's solar, she wondered what it was about. When she'd first been told her nephew wished to see her, she had worried. Had something happened to John? Was this to do with Tyrion and Arianne Martell? Both of those things made her nervous for different reasons. She quickly put her fears about John out of her mind. It was too soon for anything to have happened, with or to him. John had only been gone a day or so, and she'd seen Ghost that morning with Joy and Loras, and the wolf looked unworried. which then had her mind running to Tyrion and Arianne. Was something happening there, something more than she already knew. They had not been subtle, either of them, and she'd found the girl herself to be a bit of an enigma. How she dressed, acted. Had she not met Oberyn already, she'd have found it scandalous. Having met her uncle, though she could see where Arianne and he were so much alike in certain ways. She had feared that the girl was just using her nephew, but when she'd looked closer, it was little things that made her think there was more to it than that, and the talk she'd had with the girl had helped also. "Are they all inside?" she asked Pharaoh, who nodded, and so she walked into the room. Kevin looked agitated, Jaime and Tyrion too, while Jerian just seemed bored. Her brother, though, had been getting that look on his face more and more lately. Unless he was with Ashara Dane, that was. She had to bite her cheek to stop herself laughing at the image in her head. 3 lovesick fools and Kevin, she thought as she took her seat and waited for Jaime to speak, though it was Kevin who did so. 2 shipments of ice, 1 of wood, and a larger shipment of wine. All in all, a little over 50,000 gold dragons were down. Kevin said. As she looked to him. "What?" she asked, confused. 3 of our deliveries in Essos have been attacked. Our men have been killed, and we've received this from Sir Richard, Jaime said, handing her the note. Taking it from his hands, she opened it and read it quickly, feeling her anger rise as she did so. That duplicitous falcon needed his wings cut and cut soon. As for the fat magister, Jenna had heard them speak of him, but didn't know much of him really. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. "I'm going over myself. They use sellswords. Well, I intend to show them what happens when you play with lions," Kevin said. "You are letting your anger cloud your judgment, Kevin," Jerian said. "They killed my men," Kevin said loudly. "So what? You intend to what? Bring more men to Essos. Bring some of those knights and soldiers you've gathered in Lannisport," Jerian said, looking to him. "Surely I'm not the only one who sees the folly in this?" "Aye, Kevin. Garion has the right of it. You don't send lions to hunt dogs," Jaime said with a smirk. "Then what? We're to do nothing?" Kevin said, shaking his head. "We use wolves," Tyrion said a moment later. "What wolves?" Jenna asked. "They attacked using sellswords, did they not? Sellswords pretending to be bandits?" Tyrion asked Kevin, who nodded. "Then we hire our own. We hire men who know Essos far better than we, men who can be trusted," her nephew said. "Who?" Jaime asked. "The Company of the Rose. Northmen," Tyrion said. She sat around while they discussed it over and over. The plan itself was sound, but who her nephew wished to use caused some concern. Why he wished to use the Company of the Rose she couldn't fathom. Less so the more she heard talk of them and who they were. Northmen who had refused to kneel to the dragons 300 years ago, who'd instead left and formed a company of sellswords in Essos. It made no sense to her why these men and not someone else, and so she waited until things had calmed before she then asked her nephew the questions on her mind. "Why this company, Tyrion?" Jenna asked, looking to her nephew. "They're good men, loyal, and unlike some of the other companies, they understand and think like Westerosi," Tyrion said. "What does that mean?" she asked, confused. "The Golden Company follows its own creed, its own oaths. Our word is as good as gold. They're made up of men who came from Westeros, men who can trace their families back to Westeros, and so they seek to be Westerosi," Tyrion said, and it was Kevin who spoke. "What have they got to do with the Company of the Rose?" Kevin asked, clearly not convinced. "It's the same principle, Kevin. They too are at their heart Westerosi. The other companies are Essosi. They think like Essosi. Do you know how an Essosi thinks? What they're loyal to?" Jerian asked, and Kevin shook his head. "That's the thing, Uncle. Neither do I. But these men, if they say they'll do what we ask, then they'll do so. Northmen more so than any, even if their word may not be as good as gold," Tyrion said. "It's held just as true," she said, and Tyrion nodded. "Will they accept a contract from us?" Jaime asked. They will. Tell them of Jon and our connection with the North, and they will, Tyrion said, and she nodded. If these men considered themselves Northmen still, they'd see that the North suffers because of the attacks, that it harmed their countrymen as much as it did the men of the West. Very well. I'll travel to Myr and speak with them, Kevin said, and she found herself a little worried about her brother. Does it have to be you? She asked, and he nodded. They were my people. It has to be me, he said. And she didn't have it in her to argue anymore. Since we're all here, there's something I need to tell you all, Tyrion said, and she and Kevin turned to look to him. I'm going to tell Princess Arianne the truth, Tyrion, she said, shaking her head. We're together. We've been together for some time, Aunt. I can't. I won't lie to her. She needs to know. Tyrion said determinedly, and she almost wished to smile, but her worry won out for now. Are you sure you can trust her? She asked, and saw the glare he gave her. I have to, he said, though not as confidently or determinedly as he had declared he'd tell her. She knows of Jon and the dragons. Oberyn has told her almost everything I suspect, and I think you're right, brother. I think you need to tell her the truth, Jaime said, and Tyrion gave his brother a smile as she saw how much Jaime's support relaxed him. You and the princess, eh? Jerian said with a smirk. Aye, uncle. It seems we both have a thing for Dornish women, Tyrion said, and she laughed when Jerian hit him a mock punch. I'd rather no one outside the family knew what happened, Kevin said. But this is your choice, nephew. If you feel this is the right thing to do, then I'm with you, he added quickly when Tyrion looked to him. She was walking down the corridor when she heard the footsteps behind her. Tyrion, while not running, was moving far more quickly as he struggled to catch her up, and so she stopped and waited for him. Aunt, he said when he reached her. Nephew, she said back as they began to walk. Can we speak, Aunt, about Arianne? He asked, and she nodded before opening the nearest door and finding themselves in Jon's old room. What do you think of her, Aunt, truly? He asked concernedly. I had my doubts, Tyrion, she said, and saw him deflate. But she's not as I imagined. She cares for you, that much is clear, and you do her obviously. Do you see a future? She asked. I hope for one, Aunt. Gods, I hope for one, he said, and she knelt down and looked him in the eye. You are Tyrion Lannister. No matter what anyone else may say, you are my nephew, and I love you very much. Any woman would be lucky to have you for their own, Tyrion. Any woman, even a princess, she said, and hugged him tight. She held him for some time before she stood back up and they walked from the room. She had meant every word she had said to him. As a Lannister, he was a worthy consort for a princess. As a Targaryen and a dragon rider, even more so. She knew how much Jon thought of him and how he too saw him as family. The only doubt she had was whether or not her nephew was ready for the Vipers of Dorne. Oberyn would be his friend. She just hoped Doran would too. As she walked into the dining hall, she saw Joy hold court with her foster friends. The little girl was the center of attention, telling them all some story that she probably heard from Jon. She laughed as they did, saw Joy look to her and nod. She then sighed as she saw Emmon walk in, and she quickly took her seat only for him to follow. As her husband droned on and on about something, she looked to the girl's table and remembered her own childhood and her father's folly. She found herself thankful that the next generation were more lions than kittens, that Jerion was not his father's son and wouldn't see Joy badly matched. And then she laughed, causing Emmon to look at her oddly. The thought not leaving her mind, even were her brother to be that much of a fool. She knew that a dragon wouldn't allow her grandniece to suffer as she had. Volantis 296 AC, Sierra. They had tried. Sandor had gone to the river only to find the ship gone. He'd hired a horse and raced up the banks only to find nothing. They had no idea which direction the ship had sailed in. Had they stayed on the Royan, or slipped off down the Volena? Or had they gone further and taken the Selhuru? They couldn't be certain. They were not even sure that the ship hadn't just sailed out into the summer sea. Dany was lost. She tried to get through to her niece, but only Elegon and Rhaegal seemed to be able to. Sandor was furious, And had they not stolen a dragon and broken her niece's heart, then she'd feel sorry for them. As it was, she didn't, and she wished that Sandor would do all the things he said he would. He had threatened to rip the heart from John Connington's chest, to see Aegon dragged naked through the streets tied to a horse, as the Dothraki do. Shiera was not a violent woman, and yet she seemed to attract violent men, Aegor, Brynden, and now Sandor. She too had been attracted by such men. But in her heart, she longed for someone different. She sought someone who cared not for violence, and she knew that because of this, what she and Sandor had could never last. "Come, little one, let's go see your mother," she said as Rhaegal flew around her. She walked into the room to find Dany curled up on the bed, Elegon laying beside her, and Rhaegal soon flew over to join his mother and sister. Shiera too wasted no time in joining them, laying down behind Dany and softly stroking her arm, whispering in her ear that they'd find him, that they'd bring her son back to her. Dany shuddered beneath her, and Shiera looked up to see the food lay untouched on the table. "You must eat, niece. You need to be strong," she said softly. "I'm not hungry," Dany said, shaking her head. "Dany, you must. They need you. Sandorix will need his mother too." "He won't. I failed him. I should have listened. I failed him," Dany said as she began to sob. "You didn't. I didn't. We both thought it right, and I'm a lot older than you. So if anyone's to blame, it's me," she said. Though Dany wasn't listening, she was actually relieved when the girl seemed to wear herself out from crying for so long, Dany falling asleep as she held her. Getting up from the bed, she asked one of the acolytes if the dragons had been fed. She'd given Rhaegal a little that morning, but she thought she could feel their hunger. The girl arrived back a few moments later with the plate of meat. She quickly divided it up and called the dragons to her. Rhaegal came quickly, Elegon a little more hesitantly, and she saw the dragon look first to Dany and then to the meat before she took to the air. They no longer needed to tell the dragons to produce their flames when eating. It was almost as if once they had done it, they'd unlocked a door, and now they did it at will. She stroked both of them as they ate, Rhaegal leaning into her touch while Elegon was more reluctant. "The princess sleeps?" she heard the voice say from behind her. "She does. You found nothing?" she asked, without turning her head. "The flames only show me the three of you riding, while the dragons fly," Kinvara said. "Riding where?" she asked. "East," Kinvara said before she left. She felt herself shudder when the woman left, the words resonating and bringing up memories she'd long since buried, memories she'd not wished to have to confront ever again. Closing her eyes, she could still hear the voice, still see his face, and try as she might, she couldn't stop the images she saw. To go north, you must go south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back, and to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Brynden's voice said. She opened her eyes quickly. She'd done that once, followed the voice, and where had it gotten her? It was only when she followed the other ones, the ones she'd ignored, that she was placed on her true path. Was this Brynden's work? Could he have somehow manipulated her once again? All these years later, could she trust that she was following her path and not his? The dragons had finished eating. Elegon flying back over to be with Dany. Rhaegal, though, stood in front of her, his head cocked to one side, and she felt him leaning into her. Her arms wrapped around him of their own accord, and she felt a strength, a sense of peace and contentment come over her. Doubts, worries, concerns, all seemed to fade away, and as she looked at the dragon she saw something in his eyes which surprised her. He looked almost protective. Tiranvos Rhaegal, Tiranvos e Nuha Rakiros. Thank you, Rhaegal, thank you, my friend, she said, and the dragon chirped as she let him go, looking to her before flying over to Dany. She stayed in the room with Dany until Sandor arrived back. He'd once again gone to the docks and spent the day asking people if any had seen which way the ship had gone. He'd threatened, bribed, offered a reward, and brought red priests with him, all to no avail, it seemed. As he walked to the bed and looked at Dany, she could see the worry on his face, and he turned to walk to her a moment later. "She's no better?" he asked, and she shook her head. "Still not eating?" No. Fuck. She needs to eat. He said, his voice more concerned than angry. I've tried, she thinks. She failed her son, Sandor. It's hard to get her to even consider she didn't. We all failed him. I should have spoken up more. I should have gutted that fuck when he was sneaking around the rooms, Sandor said. She asked you not to, she said. And he turned and glared at her. You're blaming her? He asked angrily. No, I'm saying what she'd say. Kinvara says she saw us ride east, that's all. That vague, we ride east. She said, frustrated. Maybe we should. Maybe it's what we need to do. She's in no condition to ride, Sandor. Aye, but maybe it's what she needs. A sense of direction, something, anything. It's got to be better than this. He said, waving his hands around. We'll speak to her when she wakes. She said and saw him nod. You eaten? He asked, and she shook her head. Though he was gone before she could say she wasn't hungry, they sat in Danny's room while they ate, and she woke up while they did so. When she heard that there'd been no luck, she went to lean back against the bed, but Elegon wouldn't let her. Both she and Sandor looked on as the dragon pushed her, almost forcing her from the bed, screeching at her when she went to get back in. Shiera rose to her feet and moved towards her, worried that perhaps Danny may see this as a rejection. But she was surprised when Danny smiled and walked to the table, even more so when she took some of Sandor's food from his plate. Sandor not even saying anything about the leg of chicken that Danny was eating with no finesse whatsoever. Instead, he just got up and walked from the room, arriving back a few moments later with a larger plate and some drinks, both of which Danny soon tucked into. We need to find them. Any ideas? Danny said, and both she and Sandor were a bit taken aback by the tone. It was far more determined than the dejected one she'd been using the past few days. I checked the docks and up the banks, both directions. There's no sign of them, Sandor said reluctantly. She could tell. Yeah! Kinvara says we've to go east, that she saw us and the dragons heading east, she said. She saw them? Danny asked hopefully, and it hurt her to shake her head, though she was glad that the sadness on Danny's face seemed to only last momentarily. We could look in the flames ourselves, get her to show us, Sandor said, and Danny nodded. We will find him, and when we do, I'll show him a true dragon. I'll show him the meaning of our words, fire and blood. He stole my fire. He'll pay for it with his blood, Danny said, and despite the chill that ran down her spine at the words, she felt on this occasion it would be more than justified. The North 296 AC. Richard. Richard had ridden hard through the north. He'd laughed at the irony of the fact he was riding south to go north. He had actually been nearer to his destination days ago than he would be again for another week at least. Arriving in the city, he headed straight to speak to Morale. He was tired, hungry, and in dire need of rest, yet he knew he'd not truly get any for some time. As he stood in the room and listened to the tales Morale spun, he felt his anger rise. 3 girls recruited and 3 girls lost, all in and around the Dreadfort. He shuddered to think what could possibly have happened to them. The Boltons' reputation was not one to be ignored. Why no men, Morale? He asked. Girls are easier. Sir, the men up here are a strange bunch. Women and girls see the coin and see the benefits. The men, some of them at least, hold to their honor like a septa does her virtue. Morrow said, and he nodded. Any other problems? No, sir. Everything else is working well. It's just on or near the Dreadfort. We get nothing on the Boltons at all, other than tales from those who've left. Those who've left? A lot of the small folk took up the offer to go to Wintertown, sir, until the Lord put a stop to it. They seemed glad for the option of a life away from Bolton's lands. So I made a trip myself, and found the tales to be of a lord that brooked no dissent, a people that lived in constant fear. The Morale said. And that's all? Richard asked. That's all they'll tell me, Morale said, shaking his head. Do you need anything? Richard asked, eyeing up the bed. No, I'm good. You staying here or moving on? Moving on, I want to be back south as soon as I can. Many fires burning, my friend, he said with a smile. He accepted the new horse from Marau. His old one would perhaps not make it on the journey he had ahead of him, and then made his way to the new castle. He was no sooner in the door than Sir Wyllis joined him, directing him to the Lord Solar, where Wyman was already waiting. "Richard, it's good to see you," Wyman said as he and Wyllis took a seat, and within moments he was once again glad to be in the Manderleys' company, his mouth salivating as he looked hungrily at the warm soups and other dishes placed on the table. "I thought you may be hungry," Wyman said with a smirk as the three of them began to eat. Richard found the soup to be particularly appetizing. They talked of anything other than what he had come for as they ate, Wyman telling him of his new maester being a better sort, and of how they'd found Theomore's journal. Richard in turn telling him of the success of John's plan and how they'd managed to get them all. Some journals had been recovered, and he himself carried the best of them with him, Theobald having kept extensive notes that he knew his king would wish to read. Wyman asked about John, and he told him that if things had worked out how they expected, then by now their king may be a dragon rider. "He's really going up on a dragon?" Wyllis said, shaking his head. "Aye," he said. "He can feel her. She's ready to fly, and so that was what he intended," Richard said, and Wyman chuckled. "I look forward to seeing that, Richard. A dragon may not be a horse, but I'll wager it won't make a difference to John." Wyman said, his laugh fuller now. "When do you wish to set off?" Wyllis asked, and he was glad he was finished eating. Just the thoughts of heading to Bolton Lands filling him with dread, apt, he thought, given where they were going. "Whenever you're ready, Wyllis." "You look tired, Richard. Take a day or two to recover and then go. The weather's still mild, and a day or two won't harm. Given how you look, it'll help," Wyman said, and he nodded his agreement. In the end, he stayed 3, the news having come in about their shipments being attacked in Essos, and he cursed the distance between them and it, the time for plans to be made taking far too long. He told an angry Wyman that he'd sent warning of the Magister's plans to the Lannisters, but that by then it was probably already too late. "Speak to Kevin, Wyman. I'm sure the Lannisters feel as you do and aren't going to let this slide," he said. And Wyman nodded. "I've been meaning to travel to see Lannisport myself. Perhaps on your return you'll have a guest with you when you leave White Harbor," Wyman said. "I'd welcome the company," he said, and saw the smile on Wyman's face. "I'm sure the girls would enjoy the visit, and who knows, maybe John will let me see the dragons," Wyman said, seeming to talk himself more into it. "I can actually see him flying on one for myself," he added as they laughed. Setting off the next day, he was unsurprised by the large accompaniment Sir Wyllis brought with him, the knight having confided in him that he'd not travel Bolton Lands without a large escort. It seemed even a noble lord's son had much to fear from the flayed men. The journey through the lands was pleasant, he found, the tents warm, the food plentiful, and the company was good. Still, he was glad when they stopped off in Hornwood. Lord Haley's and his lady wife Danella were more than happy to host them, while Sir Wyllis spoke to the lord and the lady, and Richard was as polite as he could be. It was to the guards and men of Castle Hornwood that Richard spoke to, though the real information came when he found himself speaking to a young girl who worked in the kitchen. "Please don't go near the Bolton Lands, me lord. Never, me ma says I've not to ever travel that way," the girl, Kara, said. "Why not?" he asked. "Girls don't last long up there, me lord. The hounds get them," she whispered, and he could see the fear in her eyes, and not wishing to upset her any more, he left it at that for now. "Here for your trouble," he said, handing her a handful of coppers, the smile on her face making the feared look from earlier seem but a distant memory. He talked to 1 or 2 other girls, and to an older woman. All gave him somewhat the same story, tales of hounds and hunts that made no sense. One girl who had actually worked for the Boltons mentioned something about the bastard, and so as they rode the next day he asked Wyllis about him. "Aye, Roose has 2 boys. Demeric, I think, is squired, and the Vale, and Ramsay, I believe, is his bastard's name," Wyllis said as they rode by the Weeping Water. "Where is he?" he asked. "I don't believe Roose lets him live in the castle. He visits, though. Never met the lad myself," but I'd imagine he lives close by somewhere. The Dreadfort certainly lived up to its name, and the Lord looked as if he belonged here. Roose Bolton was as pale as the keep was dark, and except for his eyes, the man was unremarkable. The eyes, though, were pale and almost white, always watching and never showing what the man was thinking. He welcomed them friendly enough, though, and gladly accepted the 2 casks of hippocras that he'd had Wireless procure. After accepting guest rights, they were led into the keep itself. He felt the darkness of the exterior was matched perfectly by the coldness of the interior. There was barely any light, and the shadows danced wherever you moved, all in all creating a feeling of foreboding, be it by design or default. They were brought to the great hall, and it had to be the worst example of one he'd ever been in. Dark, smoky, and as he looked around at the torches, he could see what looked to be skeletal hands holding them in place. "I'm sure you'd like to get settled, and we'll feast tonight, but your raven intrigued me, Sir Wireless." "That and your friend's business, Sir Elaine, is it?" Roose said, and he spoke so softly that were they not directly in front of him, he'd not have been heard. "Just Elaine, my lord," he said, and Roose nodded, a barely perceptible move of his head. "As you know, my lord, my father and Lord Jamie have a long-standing business arrangement, one which Elaine would like to extend to House Bolton, and one my father is more than keen to see your lands and people benefit by," Sir Wireless said, and Roose looked at him, not saying a word. "We find ourselves expanding even further in Essos, my lord, in need of even more supplies, and your lands are fertile in timber and furs, are they not?" he said. And the Lord turned to him. "And yet it's only now you come to me?" Roose asked softly. "Indeed, other deals were negotiated based on a variety of reasons, my lord, not as a snub to House Bolton or yourself," he said, and felt discomforted by the lack of reaction on the man's face. "Even with our proximity to White Harbor, we're nearer than Carhold or Last Hearth, and yet we're one of the last to be invited to share this bounty?" Roose said, and with any other man it'd have been recriminatory, yet with the Leech Lord it was a simple statement. "Young John negotiated those deals himself, my lord. Had the small John and the Karstarks not gone to the tourney, had you been able to travel to Winterfell for the wedding then, perhaps we'd have been able to bring you in earlier," Sir Wireless said, and he saw the small nod Roose gave. "Indeed, circumstances beyond our control. Life is funny that way, Sir Wireless. I welcome the opportunity to share in the deals now, though. The girls will see you to your rooms. I look forward to the feast tonight, Sir Wireless, Elaine." The feast was friendlier, though with Roose it was hard to tell. The man sipped his hippocras and never laughed or smiled throughout the night. Richard found the servants, the women especially, all walked around almost as if they were afraid any little thing would cause displeasure. More and more the place and its name seemed made for each other. He heard little whispers during the night of how Ramsay was due to arrive, and he saw how that made the girls shiver and shake some more. He didn't get to meet the boy officially, though he saw him, and it was clear he was Roose's bastard. That and whatever fear the girls had without him there was only raised with him in residence. Richard watched the boy for the few days they stayed there, noticing how he licked his lips looking at the prettier girls and how much time he spent in the kennels. It was also hard not to notice the strange man who followed around after him, a man who seemed to discomfit the servants as much as Ramsay himself. Even were you not to see the man, you'd be sure to smell him, and each time he came close to him, Richard felt like gagging. By the time he left, he knew 2 things. The missing girls he'd sent to the Boltons were dead, and it was most likely that the bastard had done something to them. Arriving back at White Harbor, he spoke to Wyman and Wireless about his fears, and on the ship as they traveled south, he began to try to formulate a plan. The Boltons would be a problem. One needed to be dealt with now. But only a fool would leave Roose Bolton in charge for long, and his king was no fool. iHeart, 296 AC. Flying on Rainix over land was so much better than over the sea, especially for his sister herself. She had flown out to sea and up and down the coast without really traveling inland, and so she was keen to see these places, these castles she'd never seen before. They flew over Sarsfield and the Golden Tooth, finding caves in the mountains to rest in. When they reached the riverlands, he felt her need, her hunger, and so he warged into an eagle and went searching for her prey. He knew they took a chance coming out of the sky when they did. Around them, the lands were on the face of it deserted, but he knew there were people scattered throughout. Rhaenys needed to feed, though, and the aurochs would be a welcome meal. So despite it being far off their destination, he told her to fly to it, Rhaenys increasing her speed, and soon they saw them in the distance. He didn't need to ask her to use her flames, and when she landed, the aurochs was still burning. The trees around it were scorched also, and questions would no doubt be raised. "Eat, sister, eat, and then we'll find somewhere to rest," he said softly as he and Arthur walked to stretch their legs. "How are we fixed for water, Arthur?" "We're good. We can fill up just to be sure. We flew over High Heart, you know," Arthur said, and Jon nodded, knowing and feeling it as they did so. "She was hungry," he said simply. "You could feel that?" Arthur asked as they moved to the water. "The green fork flowing slowly today. I can feel a lot of things with her, even more since we flew. She can with me too. I worry what may happen if I'm hurt," he said. And Arthur looked at him curiously. "You think she can be hurt too?" "I think it's hard for anyone to hurt her, but not so much me. She feels it, Arthur, feels my pain, be it from an injury or from something else," he said, not needing to tell the knight of the other types of pain he may feel. "So what do you intend to do about it?" Arthur asked, and Jon smirked, knowing the little bit of bite in his voice was down to how much he may risk himself. Not that Jon thought he did, but others disagreed. "The ingots, Arthur. I think that's what they're for," he said as he bent down and filled the pouch, Arthur doing the same. "I don't understand. I thought they were for weapons, more swords, but I think they're for armor." "Arthur, I think they're to protect me, protect us both," he said. And Arthur looked at him. "We don't know how to have them work, Jay." "I know, but we will. I'm sure of it." With their water pouches full and with Rhaenys having eaten, he looked around to find somewhere for them to stay. They perhaps still had time to maybe make it to High Heart, but the sun was soon to rise. Unfortunately, the Riverlands didn't have many caves, and so he instead found a deserted field. It was way off the beaten track, and it looked overgrown. Climbing onto Rhaenys, they flew to it, and though it would give them very little shelter, the risk of discovery here was low, he felt. They slept that day against Rhaenys' scales, his sister wrapped around them, her heat keeping the chilly wind at bay. He found himself dreaming of Nan, and the stories she'd tell him as a boy, how he and Robb would huddle up at the scary ones, or find themselves sitting up listening eagerly to the ones that were not. Arthur had at first refused to sleep on this trip, his Kingsguard duties demanding he stay awake, though Jon, Rhaenys, and his own tiredness soon put an end to that. "You ready?" Arthur said when they'd eaten, dusk falling giving them the cover of night. "I said." The flight seemed to take no time at all, and seeing the hill through Rhaenys' eyes, he was stunned by the weirwood stumps. Landing, they climbed down, and Jon felt her immediately. Rhaenys, too. Leaning in against her, he did his best to calm his sister down, and then after a brief argument with Arthur, he walked alone through the ruins. He found her sitting by a fire, and she was as far from Nan as she could be. The woman was small, barely bigger than a dwarf, withered and gray, and she cackled as he sat down, though not for long. "Hello, Maya," he said, and she stopped, looked directly at him, and then before his eyes she changed. Briefly, very briefly. She was a young, beautiful woman. Her long, dark hair and slim frame was the complete opposite of the woman he'd just met. Her eyes, though, sparkled, and as she changed again into an older woman, it was those he focused on. He saw her then truly, and while she didn't look like Nan too much, the light in her eyes was not dissimilar. "Long have I waited for the white wolf, the winter dragon, the prince that was promised," Maya said, and Jon took a seat. "You knew I would come?" he asked. "I waited for you, just as she did and just as he does. Be careful when you go to him. Jon Snow, for the gods have abandoned my brother and he serves only himself now," she said as she picked up a stick and threw it onto the fire. "Blood Raven?" he asked, though he knew the answer. 1,000 eyes in one. Yet here he can't see, and you he can't follow. Use that, Jon Snow. Use that, and don't hesitate when the time comes. You know why I've come. You want to hear the truth of my Jenny, the tale I've never told. She said sadly. I do, if you can tell me. His voice soft, and she smiled at it. You will sing for me? Sing the song? She asked hopefully. I will. Life is strange, Jon Snow. Some things need to happen, some things are meant to happen, and some lives are meant to be lived. Others are not. You were not supposed to be Jaehaerys Targaryen, not supposed to be Rhaegar's son, she said, and he nodded. I don't understand. Who was I supposed to be? He said, and she laughed, though it was a bitter one with no humor. You were supposed to be Daeron, she said, confusing him. Daeron? That's what my Jenny would have called you. She and Duncan would have named you for the young dragon. But fate finds a way, and there are things not even the gods can change from happening, she said. And Jon looked at her, unable to find a lie in her face, knowing that she believed what she said at least. What was to happen? My Jenny carried a babe that would have been your father, but fates conspired, maesters plotted, and my brother would not allow the child be born. Even beyond the wall, Brynden had power and foresight, and the gods made a terrible mistake in granting him the opportunity to use it. A choice they gave him, suffer for his crimes or make amends. But Brynden was wallowing in grief and despair, in anger and hate, and they never saw that. Hubris, even the gods can be guilty of it. Jon Snow, see that you are not. I don't understand. If I was supposed to be born to Prince Duncan's line, to Jenny's line, then how come I ended up born to Rhaegar's? He lived. My Jenny and her babe did not. She said sadly, though not bitterly, he noted. But the gods are powerful indeed. A dragon was sent and away you were took, held in its embrace until the time was right. Fire and blood was the call, Jon Snow, and fire and blood the demands. He looked to see the tears fall from her eyes and felt unable to move, to help, and so he just watched and waited. He felt her reach over and grab his hand, and they were no longer sitting by the fire. They were in the Red Keep, and he watched as a dark-haired man danced with a beautiful fair-haired girl with flowers in her hair. They were in a room, and the same woman and man cried over the body of a young man, his dark hair almost as long as Jon's own, and he longed to reach over to remove the stones from his eyes. Before he got the chance, he was in a room he remembered well, the room Rhaenys was born in, and he watched a woman shout out in pain as a babe was born. He looked on as she held the babe in her arms, as she closed her eyes and kissed the babe on the forehead. My sweet babe, the woman said, and he watched as the life went from her and listened as the babe cried. He was in the courtyard of the Red Keep, the boy no more than 6. Standing there in front of him was a man wearing a white cloak, a younger man than he knew him as, yet he recognized him all the same. The man and boy sparred, the boy laughing as he got a hit in and scowling when his sword was knocked from his hand. What did I say, my prince? Not to get cocky, Sir Barristan. Aye. Now let's try again. They were at the wall now, more men than he had ever seen lined beneath it, and facing them was an army of some sort. They stood off somewhere in the distance, the darkness covering their movements. He could see the fear in the men, the despair, and then the cheers began, the dragon flying over, her white scales and blue wings reflecting against the moon. Hail to the prince. Hail to Prince Daeron. When he felt her hand go from his, he looked, and she was standing in front of the fire. She stared down at him, and as he went to stand, she placed her hand on his shoulder, holding him in place. My family was blessed with the sight, and we knew we had a role to play. I thought mine was to see the prince born, and in a way it was, just not how I would have wished. Forgive me, Jon Snow, for I bear you no ill will, but I'd be lying if I said I wished you were not someone else, she said, looking at him. I understand. There's nothing to forgive, he said, his voice full of sympathy for the loss the woman had endured. Is there not? She said, shaking her head. When first I went to court with my Ginny, it was with a prophecy that changed the fate of a house, though I didn't know it then. Do you know why your grandfather married your grandmother, Jon Snow? I thought my great-grandfather decided it, he said, assuming that's how it happened. Aye, that he did. Though I'm afraid I played my part. I was sent with words, with a prophecy that turned out true, though I know it not then. The prince that was promised would come from the line of your grandfather and grandmother. That's what I told them, and I know now that it came not from the gods, but from my brother. I don't understand, you said, Brendan. Ha! The gods, the fucking gods play their games through us all. Jon Snow, me, you, even Brendan. He sent me as a misdirection, a way to give him a path to you, though he was a fool, and a fool's errand never works out how you expect. He looked at her in utter confusion now. What she was saying made no sense. Bloodraven was his enemy, was trying to stop him being born, and yet he'd sent her to ensure he was born. Our families have been linked for all of time. Jon Snow, Starks, Blackwoods, Targaryens. Do you know who your great-great-grandmother was? The Stark, she asked, and he tried to remember. His grandmother Lyanna was a Flint. His sister Arya was named after her mother. His grandfather Rickard's mother was a Locke, but he couldn't think, couldn't place the name. Truth be told, he'd looked far more into his Targaryen tree than his Stark one. Melantha Blackwood, she said, and he knew it, felt it, that he'd known this, and yet he'd not, which was odd. I knew that. Why couldn't I remember? He asked, confused. You've learned a lot, and have more to learn. My time is nearly up, so listen and listen well. You were inevitable, always meant to be. Nothing or no one could stop you coming. Not the maesters, not my brother, no one. The gods have need of you, Jon Snow, and they will test you. Do not falter, do not fear, and do what must be done. I will, he said, his voice full of determination, and the old woman sat down. Go to Summerhall. Search among the ruins, answers you will find, though to what questions I know not. My time is at an end, and you owe me a song, she said with a smile. He nodded and sat down, looking at her, began to sing. High in the halls of the kings who were gone, Jenny would dance with her ghosts, the ones she had lost and the ones she had found, and the ones who had loved her the most, the ones who'd been gone for so very long, she couldn't remember their names. They spun her around on the damp old stones, spun away all her sorrow and pain, and she never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave. They danced through the day and into the night, through the snow that swept through the hall from winter to summer, then winter again, till the walls did crumble and fall. And she never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, and she never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave, never wanted to leave. And the one, as he finished, he looked over to the woman, stunned to see she was the young, dark-haired girl she had once been. She sat with a smile on her face, her eyes were closed, and it took him a few moments to realize that she was no longer with him. At some point during the song she had passed, and he felt intense sadness about it. In another life, this woman would have been his great-grandmother. Walking back to Arthur, he told him what had happened, and they looked around for branches, stones, and twigs, and built a pyre for the woman. Standing over the body, he said some words, spoke to the old gods, and asked them to reunite her with her family, with her mother, her sister, and to let her see her daughter once more. He climbed up on Rhaenix's back, and as they took to the sky, she faced the pyre, and he closed his eyes. Dracarys, he said, and the flames hit the pyre, and soon Maya Rivers was no more.